Good evening, everyone. I call to order the meeting of the Open Source Voting System Technical Advisory Committee of the San Francisco Elections Commission. Today is Thursday, December 14th, 2017, and the time is now 6:05 p.m. I'm the chair, Chris Jordanic. Secretary Chan, can you take the roll?
Chair Chris Jordanic.
Here.
Member Larry Profundo is not here. Member Carl Haig is not here. Member Roland Patel.
Here.
Member Tony Wasserman.
Here.
You have three. You have a quorum.
Okay, and Member Bufindo is traveling for work. He was held longer than he expected, so he has an excused absence. And Member Haig is let me know he's going to be here shortly. He's late because of traffic. And we also have with us today Secretary John Chan. So before we move on and continue the meeting, I'd like for us to have a moment of silence for the tragedy that happened this week of the passing away of Mayor Ali. Okay. Next item.
Number 2, general public comment. Public comment on any issue within the committee's general jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
Okay.
I guess I'll start. I just wanted to go over a couple of recent election integrity news, I guess. In Alabama, some election integrity activists were initially successful in getting a court order, I believe it was, to mandate that digital ballot images created by vote tabulators be preserved, and that decision was then shortly thereafter stayed by the Alabama Supreme Court. And I wanted to mention that because just for the scope of this project, the importance of preserving both digital and paper ballots. That's an issue that you might want to address in your recommendations. And also, this decision may complicate any possible recounts that may occur in this race. And in the second news item is about an audit that was started in Florida, or that was going to happen in Florida, like a manual hand count of a particular race from 2016 that it was the Debbie Wasserman versus Nova race, and so some election integrity activists wanted to do a manual recount of those ballots, and when they arrived to do this, they discovered that the county ROB or whatever had destroyed the paper ballots. So oh, and there was another, I'll send Secretary Chan some articles about this so you can read a little more in detail. But again, so this ties back to the first one, the preservation of both digital and paper ballots. But also there was a detail about the Florida race that involved ballot on demand machines. So while I understand that both pre-printed and ballot on demand ballots will have issues, just wanted to maybe I want to take a look at what might have occurred there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know how to do this.
no further members of the public, next item.
Item number 3, approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the November 16th, 2017 committee meeting.
Okay, and Secretary Chen, thank you again for doing an excellent job, very thorough.
Thank you.
So,
Are there any suggestions for edits that anyone has?
yes. In the last line of page 4, it says that I will be responsible for the February 21st and March 21st meetings of the Election Commission. And I may have been in some sleep-induced fog at the time, but I do not remember signing up for both of those. I would be able to do the latter,
Okay.
but not both.
Also, just so you know, like, if, we can also change those assignments at this
Yeah,
meeting. We don't,
okay, fine.
so if we had actually said that,
I don't remember us saying it, but did it came out in the transcription?
okay. Maybe
I
you-
wasn't on drugs.
Generous, I think.
I wasn't on drugs, I promise.
Well, would you like, we could maybe weaken the wording and say, expressed, it was,
We'll do the meeting.
if possible, like, if available.
Also,
Yeah.
in today's.
Member Wasserman is available for,
But won't do it.
doesn't commit me.
Yeah. I had one request for clarification, which is on page 7, the second paragraph. Talks about me bringing up a question about my own word usage. And that read a bit oddly to me, so I wanted to clarify that I brought up that Chris had questioned me about my usage of a word.
Oh,
Because the way I first read it, I got very confused because I thought it said that I was raising questions about myself, which, I mean, I'm happy to do, but that seemed a bit split-brained, so.
Okay, what would you like to propose?
Maybe just after the word question, insert from Chair Jordanic.
Okay. And then also, I don't know why there's an ellipsis there, you could just make it a period. Or,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, not a.
Or
maybe
nothing.
Nothing, right.
Yep.
So, but just going back, Tony, your comment, did you want to, just again, I want to emphasize that just because it's written here doesn't mean you have to do it, but did you want to propose a different wording for that?
I did.
Okay,
I said, Member Wasserman will be available for,
okay,
so that doesn't commit me
Okay,
to
I see.
actually do it.
okay.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, it's fine with me.
All right.
Anyone else? And while you're thinking about that, let's take public comment. Okay, seeing none? Was the conference actually called Scale? Was that?
Yeah.
Conference is scale followed by a number. So, yeah, like scale 15, scale 16.
And it stands for like the Southern California something, something, something. but-
Is it in
Yeah.
all caps?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. It's
Maybe we could change that.
Southern California
If we're gonna go to that level of corrections, then Libre Planet is also written together. But
Oh, it's one word.
yeah,
Okay.
but with the capital P, it's still with the capital P though. It has like capital L. So, which I wasn't gonna bring it up, but if we're gonna
be picky.
if we're gonna be picky, then let's
The
go.
proper nouns are good. Okay, when anyone's ready, we could do a motion.
To accept the minutes as edited. So moved.
I'll second that.
All right. Moved by Member Wasserman, seconded by Member Cattell. Is there any further discussion before we vote? Seeing none, Secretary Chan?
Chair Giordano,
Yes.
Member Cattell,
Yes.
Member Wasserman,
Yes.
it carries.
Okay, and the minutes are approved. Next item.
Item number 4, member reports. Member reports on committee-related activities not covered by another item on this agenda, including but not limited to the last election commission meeting, Department of Election Progress, research finding, and news reports.
Okay, would anyone like to begin? Is anything maybe you've learned since the last meeting or activities? Other than,
I guess you or I could update on the licensing thing that you did,
Yeah, I could,
or is that more appropriate for a different item? I mean, I didn't do anything. You just sent me your stuff, and I said this looks good.
yeah,
So I don't want to.
let's do that during the administration, because it's on the
Okay.
website.
Right now, I'm just having a hell of a time reading Carl's email that's in the packet for this.
Yeah, it's
agenda item.
unfortunate he's not here right now. So,
Yeah, but there's some good stuff in there.
yeah, and actually, if some of it's on topic for other items, we could always discuss it there. I'll mention a couple things. So I was invited to speak at 2 events next year. One is a conference in January at UC Hastings, or Hastings Law School it's called. And that's towards the end of the month, I think. They're doing some panel discussions on voting rights, and I'll be talking about the open source voting project. And then there's also in May a conference, it's the second annual conference of the GET Summit, which is, at last year's event they had, Secretary of State Padilla was there, and Secretary of State of Colorado, and a number of other people.
What is the GET Summit?
Last year it stood for Global Election Technology,
Oh, okay.
and this one they kept the same acronym, but it stands for something different. It's, I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but that's in May.
When in May?
And let's see. I guess, and also I included in the minutes, or the agenda packet, this document that was a part of the agenda packet for one of the commission meetings. This is the template, they're calling it a template document for the consultant's report. And I guess I was told that the content of this shouldn't be taken to, it's more just placeholder content. I think.
Is that in this binder?
Yeah, it's under the agenda item number 4. Okay.
Oh, there it is. I see it.
Well, Member Hague has just arrived. It's 6:18 p.m. during agenda item number 4.
Four? Which is wonderful timing because I'm just reading the email from you, Carl.
Yeah.
That's in the packet that you sent. Well, it's a month ago at this point that you sent it. And I think it was just too late to make it into last month's agenda, but there's some really fascinating stuff in there. In particular, your experience that a lot of the open source voting software you tried had just hellish dependencies and.
That's one issue. The other thing I noticed is that all of it had 0 comments in the code.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's never a good thing.
So, one thing about open count is it's one monolithic GUI blob.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I got it to compile, but it crashes on the demo, so there's some version dependencies. But also, they lost the documentation for it. It was on Google Code, yeah. So they thought they had it, but they didn't.
Who's they?
It's now part of, what's the group that was doing the Colorado
Free and
RNA?
Fair?
Free and Fair.
Company.
And so they thought it used to be on Google Code, but Google Code erased it.
But there's probably, did you look in archive.org?
I didn't look for that, but anyway, they emailed me a few days ago. I mean, I emailed them like a month ago. They said they'd get it, but then they said, oh, they didn't have it. So then they said they were gonna email the Berkeley people and ask them.
Yeah, there might be an archival version of it, because you know, the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, I can try that. But anyway, just, that's some of the experiences. So one of my recommendations is that part of the deliverables should be, you know, a built environment. And
Yeah.
that should be something that the public can reproduce.
Yeah,
And then, you know, we have a snapshot, and then ideally, the public could also reproduce the builds
Mhm.
and verify the binary somehow.
that's what I've been putting off writing about for months, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if you were there in that particular meeting, but I mentioned reproducible builds at one point, and I was like, I want to try and find a way to put that into things somewhere, but I wasn't quite sure where. But yeah, this is exactly on point, because I think there's a couple recommendations to be had from this, in ways in which, you know, we don't want to be like open count. Like, don't, like as you said, split things into pieces. Open count is a monolith, and it's 2017, let's use containers.
Yeah, so, Prime 3 was kind of interesting, but it sort of still looks like a student project. I mean, it hasn't been productized. Apparently, some states are using it for disability, but I guess it's like our alternative format ballots, which I don't know if you've had a chance to discuss. But one interesting thing about Prime 3, it was really aggressive in pulling together all these different resources. Like, it has speech synthesis and voice recognition, and they're all done with MScript and put into JavaScript.
Yeah.
So they really did a good job of leveraging other open source packages. So I thought that was a very good demo, although the HTML and JavaScript is pretty clunky. It's like old-fashioned frames.
When was it written, do you know?
What?
Do you know when it was written?
A long time ago, I think like 2005 originally.
Right, well,
So
I think what you're describing roughly matches my expectations for like software written around the time.
Yeah, but I mean, it's sort of easy enough to understand. But the other thing is that it uses a user interface called low error voting interface. It was there was a paper written on how to make a user interface that supposedly reduced user errors to a certain extent. So that was another interesting thing about it.
What is that exactly?
It's just a style where you put a contest kind of in a menu bar on the left side that you can click, and then you can make a selection and then also go forwards and backwards, like left and right.
Were you able to get that working?
Yeah, it works fine. Just the output's kind of ugly, but
How was the documentation for that project?
there is some documentation. There's no documentation in the code, no comments in the code, but it's relatively easy to understand.
And then were all the JavaScript dependencies, were those vendored in the repository, or how did that work?
They didn't use that much.
Oh.
So there was a repository. It's all self-contained. It doesn't
Like all the
use any.
speech synthesis stuff? that you said?
Oh, yeah, that's like another. It's in the repository, but I think it might just be the MScripted version from some other place, some other repository. So it's based on some other, speech synthesis and also voice recognition.
Presumably open source.
Right.
There's a new Mozilla project on speech recognition that apparently is a step up from previous open source speech recognition solutions. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I know, I can certainly find the right people at.
So I couldn't get the speech recognition to work on my browser, but I didn't really investigate what the issue was.
But it might be worth, I mean, since there's been such an advance in that in the past few years, it might be worth looking at the new one. Did you look at Helios?
No. What is Helios?
Helios is an open source voting system that I've used for things like association elections. I don't know how well it scales, but you know, it does give, it is an online voting system, open source. I don't know, I've not seen it used in a ballot, traditional kind of precinct ballot setting, but as an online open source mechanism if we need that for some of these special cases, particularly the remote voters and things like that.
Carl, can I ask you, can you just describe what does open count do? Like, would, yeah, like, how does it work?
Well, it's actually hard to know that exactly because the documentation is gone.
And it doesn't run?
Well, it also crashes on the demo ballot.
That's what I meant,
We
yeah.
can read the source code.
But it kind of includes your, what did you call it for the
Ballot image interpreter?
the ballot?
Or picture.
The thing you just added, the creator.
Oh, the layout analyzer or
The
whatever.
layout analyzer, so it has a layout analyzer built in, and then you can feed it image files,
Oh, and it uses that, okay.
and then it'll scan the PNGs or TIFF or whatever your image files are, and then it includes the tallying. So it's basically your, what you called, what did you call it? The all-encompassing one, ballot scanning,
Well, the
in terms of module.
central ballot scanner thing. I don't think it's in this document.
Oh, central ballot scanner.
Yeah.
So basically it includes the central ballot scanner as well as the ballot layout analyzer.
Okay, do you think maybe for one of the next meetings, could you maybe try getting in touch with the, maybe the original authors of it and see if they have, maybe any of the grad students have access to the old documentation or?
Well, actually, the guy that replied to me, I think, was one of the originals.
Oh.
But he said he was gonna contact the people in Berkeley.
Oh, so they're gonna look, okay.
So if I don't hear back from them in a couple weeks, I'll send him another email and ask about that.
And then just one
Well,
more.
it's also written in Haskell, which I'm not familiar with, so it's, besides no comments in the code,
So,
it's,
I mean, one overall question I have is just kind of like after doing all this research, like what's your summary as to like what's usable and what's not? Like, do you think that there's stuff that's usable or not really?
I don't know if it's directly usable, but I think it could serve as a model or a prototype or,
Okay.
or, you know, for a design basis. Because, I mean, even if you use the code, then it really needs a lot of work in
Yeah.
terms of documentation and testing and so forth to really make it productized. And in terms of some of the layouts that these software packages produce, it's really kind of crude and clunky.
Mhm.
So I would say that needs to be redone.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think at least as far as a template, as a basis for planning, I think that's a good model, and then could be somewhat easy to understand how to develop each piece and, you know, what's needed. The other thing in my memo that I found out about was the Secretary of State certified 2 vendors to produce so-called alternative format ballots.
Yeah, that was new to me, that's interesting.
And that's pretty much what Prime 3 does, and a lot of like P-Vote, and also these 2 vendors, they also had a similar thing. They just print out on plain paper. So like Prime 3 prints out a kind of a clunky ballot in a QR code, and that's the ballot that you're supposed to scan and use. So I think with alternative format, the idea is that people with disabilities can use a computer at their home and print it out on their home printer, and then they have a special envelope to return it. And they may have to agree that it'll be opened and then remarked on a official ballot.
Yeah, I think the term that,
It's kind of sketchy in my opinion, but sure.
the
Well-
remarking.
Yeah.
So here's this,
Oh, okay.
heliosvoting.org.
Oh, it's from Trust the Vote? Oh, they also make it.
Sorry, you were saying, Chris?
Oh, I was saying, Oh, yeah, yeah, so in California, I think the legislation uses the phrase remote accessible vote by mail ballot. So
Yes.
rather than alternative format.
I think actually alternative format might even be a trademark of one of those
Oh,
vendors.
okay.
So it's a little bit confusing to me, but what was the correct terminology?
I think it's called remote accessible vote by mail.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
That's actually your email too, that phrase.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because, yeah, like you said, the Prime 3 is sort of like these remote accessible systems, and yet they're using it in the precinct. So it's
Yeah,
not necessarily restricted to vote by mail.
I guess anything that works remotely works locally as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, I know I got in contact with one of those vendors and they sent me a sample of their, what the voting looked. It also looked kind of crude to me.
Yeah, it actually might be kind of fun to have an example of printout from, like Prime 3, and we could just include that in an agenda package.
Yeah, I
for
can make,
future
I
reference.
have it in my notes, but I can make a printout.
Okay. Yeah, it might be good to check that yours is of the same quality as the one they're using in New Hampshire. I don't know if that's possible, but.
I just downloaded the
Okay.
software that's in the Git repository, so I don't actually know if New Hampshire has modified it somehow or what.
Okay.
So the other thing I noticed about Prime 3 is they don't have any ballot conversion software. It's like you go in manually and with a JavaScript GUI, fill out some stuff and then it prints out the JavaScript data file that the voting system uses.
Wait.
Sorry, can you explain it again?
Yeah.
Normally you have to.
Like, what are you trying to do when you perform this process?
Well, basically you have to create the list of contests and,
Yeah.
and candidates or choices that you have. And so those are encoded in a piece of JavaScript data.
Yeah, like a JSON
So,
thing.
yeah, except well, not quite that, but
Okay, well.
anyway, so
You're saying like
normally
the
you'd
election
have
definition,
normally you'd have
the election definition?
exactly.
Okay.
So normally you'd have a software package that would read some sort of contest candidate definition file and then create the JavaScript.
Yeah.
So what they have is a way to manually go in and type all that stuff into their JavaScript form.
So you can't import it from another formats?
No,
Okay.
but I mean, you could write that software, it's just.
Yeah.
For some reason, they just decided to make a manual entry instead of a converter.
And then, can you tell, like, if you're using Prime 3, is it like hard-coded for one ballot type? Or is there like a step where?
Basically,
that's
each
a
ballot
select
type would be a separate file. So I think they have a thing where you hold a QR code to a reader, and then the QR code accesses whichever ballot type HTML file.
Okay.
So one of the things that the reasons that I think that Chris asked that is in the last meeting I reported that I saw an article about how Concord had for the first time used Prime 3 in a municipal election, which apparently had never been done before. And it sounded like they had either just had some technical woes with it or actually had to make modifications to it to make that work. And from what people here said, or from what I heard from people last month, it sounded like the system currently deployed in New Hampshire contains modifications that they have not yet open sourced. So it's the version of Prime 3 you can find online, plus some other stuff they haven't gotten around to publishing yet. Do you see anything that you would have anticipated would cause problems if you tried to use it for like a different type of election, or?
No, but I mean, I guess.
I mean, it doesn't mean it's not there,
Some
but yeah.
voting types, like it doesn't have rank choice, but
Right.
I mean, you could add those things in, so it's,
Yeah.
there's no like major impediment, I think.
Yeah, I didn't get the impression that the reason they hadn't used it for municipal was because it didn't support some. I think it's just they didn't really get around to it.
Mhm.
But I think some of the newer changes were making the speech component better. I think that's what the article said.
Okay, yeah.
That could very well be. It's kind of funny because it just goes through and cycles through all the choices, and then you have to say vote or something like that at the right spot to cause it to stop, and then use that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
they might have not liked the way that worked and
Yeah.
somehow changed it.
Yeah, I was mostly just wondering, like, you know, I figured there had to be something if it took them 10 years from statewide rollout to actually using it in a municipal election. Because they use it for state elections, is my understanding.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like they've done much with it.
It's a shame too, because nowadays with smartphones, you could do a lot more.
So some of the other things I reported in the memo, well, a few more links, but I also read a lot of the background papers on, like the Star Vote from Travis County and the original system that's, I guess Chicago is now, they were, the memo they had was based on that system. So essentially it was just done to a demo phase, and I haven't seen any of the software available. But there's actually some very good papers written, and those papers are actually a good guideline for how do you use commercial off-the-shelf hardware to do voting. So this would be like the precinct voting that includes disability access, sort of similar to LA. It basically is also very similar to LA's system.
It'd be useful to get some of those links in the document
I was
probably.
just thinking that too.
And they also, they actually were very detailed about the security and, other kinds of issues. So I thought their papers at least were very good in terms of that being a basis of design principles and functional requirements. Okay, it was Open Voting Consortium was the one, and they actually did a demo with supposedly the Santa Cruz Registrar of Voters. But then I don't think it ever went beyond that demo.
Wouldn't it be cool if we like hosted a Prime 3 instance on our?
Oh, yeah, on a website somewhere. I mean, it sounds like that thing actually runs, right? So you could do it.
What?
It sounds like that thing actually runs without too much trouble. So yeah, you could totally host an example instance of it somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's actually, well, I mean, it's related, but one of the reasons it's harder to write about the New Hampshire use is because in Travis County and LA, there's all this documentation online, but
Yeah.
for New Hampshire, there's nothing really official from, I don't know, did you find that too? Like, there's nothing describing from the New Hampshire Secretary of State's website?
I haven't seen, I mean, all the things that I could find were just from, I guess the Prime 3 people in their repositories.
Yeah.
So actually, it turns out re-implementing what they did is not a huge effort. I mean, it's like a man-month of time or something like that.
Right, especially, which is probably worth it over reuse if the code is like 12 years old.
Yeah, so I mean, you could come up with I guess a nicer or more modern layout.
Well, and use like better speech libraries and
And
stuff
use
like
like
that.
Ajax instead of
Yeah.
frames or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, was jQuery even out then? Like, different world.
No, not in 2005. People were playing with it, I think.
So I also looked at the commercial software. And that also was kind of weird, although it looked a little bit nicer.
Huh.
Right, but it's a lot of it is probably like the Java era as well.
How is that, what can we use from what you learned about the commercial stuff? Some artist architecture?
That also was that was a little bit bloated, although more modern, but also no comments. But not that it matters in release code.
Wait, how are you able to look at the source code for the commercial stuff?
They sent me a sample file of what a voter would get, so I could try it out. Only their sample is
Wait,
like,
who did?
I contacted the company that
Which
sells
company?
the accessible, what is it called? Alternative format ballot.
Oh, I see.
They were one of the vendors that were approved by the Secretary of State, so I emailed them just to ask about it.
Oh, they gave you the UI, not the source code, or what did they?
Well, the UI, basically, what they do is they send the voter a JavaScript file, that runs standalone on their computer. And that prints out,
So you just bring it up in a browser.
That's interesting, okay.
and then you, well,
So
which
they-
is
they
the same
send-
way
They
that,
send you code to execute, basically.
yeah, so,
To interpret.
well, so it's essentially the same thing as what Prime 3 does, except that Prime 3 is designed, you know, it says, oh, well, you should only run it in Firefox probably, and anyway, it's designed to be run on a set machine with a set version of the,
So it raises a question. I mean, Firefox is an open source browser and the others are not. Is there, if we're going to hold out for open source voting, are we going to allow people to use Edge or Chrome or?
Chrome is open source.
No,
Chromium is open source.
Chromium is open
Chromium,
source.
okay.
But
Chrome is not.
Yeah.
things that run in one generally run in the other. The differences between them are pretty edge casey.
But if it's based on Linux, you're kind of,
You have-
Probably.
I mean, you could say that about the phone or the computer itself, too.
Right.
If
Yeah,
you're going to run stuff
the
in
question
user's
is how
device, run in
religious
the
we're
user's
going to
device.
be.
But yeah, obviously, if this project results in something that runs in a user's browser, then it should run in at least one open source browser, but
Yeah.
on the modern web, I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah.
If you manage to come up with something that ran in Chrome but not in Chromium, then we have other problems, and you're doing something very weird that you should not be doing in
Right.
a voting thing.
Yeah.
So, with the remote accessible voting, is there a reason they're sending you the file instead of just accessing it over a website? Is this like some security issue or something, or?
they didn't have a demo.
Oh,
I mean, it's actually a demo. It's like, which football team do you want to vote for? So it's not even very representative of a
I mean,
realistic.
what they sent you, is that what the voter experience is too, or were they just sending you a demo? Like
I think that's what the voter experience is,
Yeah.
although I'm not sure how it's
You have to run
delivered.
JavaScript on the client. You can't run it.
Yeah,
You
but
can
is
run
it-
Node.js or something in the background.
But is it like encapsulated in the web page you access, or do you like ship you a .js file and you have to figure
Yeah.
out how to run it, right?
that's what I'm asking.
No, it's an HTML file.
Okay, that probably works reasonably well.
And I mean, I think it's just one HTML file, and
Did
it's
they
got
like
all
email
the
you an
jobs.
HTML file?
What?
Did they like email you the HTML?
Yeah,
Okay.
I asked him, do you have something I could see what it's like? So,
Right.
turns out the guy, he said, oh, I was just out in Santa Clara County talking, you know, they're basically, now that they're approved, they're trying to sell it to, counties in
Yeah,
California.
I'm just wondering if maybe this is to like get around some restriction, like you can't be voting over the internet, so you like run a.
Oh, that's possible,
That's
yeah.
what I'm wondering about. But, okay. Is there any?
Well, the other thing is that with this process, you're given a special mail envelope. So I guess you could say, you know, normally you use special paper, but in this case, the special paper is in the envelope that encloses your home printed
Mhm.
ballot.
I've actually used a system like this for the most recent European Parliament election. It was a pilot. Unfortunately, they forgot to send me the special envelope, and so I couldn't vote. And that kind of turned me away from their experiments for a while. But it was a similar system. They
It's a new
had
way
me
to do
print-
voter suppression.
They had me print a ballot at home, which they had also looked very different from the official ballot because there are so many lists and candidates. They had instead also simplified the ballot in a way that you can't do it at a polling place. So normally the ballot is about this big and maybe this
You
tall.
need a piece of paper?
Yeah.
A card that you fill out?
Well, it's not a card. It's foldable, obviously, because
Yeah.
it can't be. But it's normally about that big
Oh, it's
because
like
it's
a
like, you know,
map.
20 columns across, and all the columns are like, you know, 30 candidates deep or something like that. So instead, what they did for the people who were doing the print at home pilot is they sent them a PDF of that matrix with all the candidates, but then they gave you a piece of paper where you just like colored two boxes, one for each number, right? Like the number of the column and the number of the row, basically. The columns represent parties and the rows represent candidates for that party. And so you could color the number for your party and then color the number for the candidate within the party, and that made the ballot.
Okay.
That actually made the ballot like letter size or A4 sized, so that you could just like fold it up and put it in an envelope and send it back, but I never got my envelope. But I never heard about it again, so I don't know what the outcome of that pilot was.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to report, Carl?
Let's see if there's any other things. So anyway, I mean, if you're interested, I can write more up on the different open source packages.
Yeah.
Or just, from this review, or also put together some PDFs of the outputs.
Yeah, when we get into the items, like the backgrounds, let's talk about maybe, kind of reworking this. You can rework some of this into the document, maybe. I think it's.
So I mean, what I sent was more like just a report for us to
Yeah.
talk about, not anything to
Yeah,
post.
right.
It was, I think it's very well done. There's a lot of good information there,
Yeah,
so
definitely.
thank you for doing that.
There's a couple of other links to things like the papers that, for example, on these open source folders, so we might want to add
Mhm.
those to our, but I can propose some specific
Okay.
Yeah.
diffs.
Yeah, I would really love for you to propose, I mean, I wrote it down as a thing for myself, but if you want to do it, I think that might even be better, because you just already written a bunch of text about it, to propose recommendations for next time for separating out sensitive stuff, for, as you mentioned, for containers / portability, that idea of having it not crash because of a minor library version, like containers work for that, and it's a modern technology, and recommending that those be built reproducibly.
So, I'd never seen clunky spelled with an initial K.
Yeah, I reserved my comments for the next section where we have the report that we're actually gonna send to the commission, where we actually care about that kind of stuff.
Well, nerd is spelled with a K.
Yeah,
Or
so is
whatever.
kludge.
Yeah.
Okay, so on this member reports item, I guess we should also talk about, Rowan, you were at the commission meeting, do you want to report on that?
Oh, yes, if I remember, because that was a while ago, and then I left town. I went to the commission meeting. I honestly don't remember much of what happened there. You were there too, you might remember more.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
Thanksgiving just kind of reset my brain.
I'm also you were also there for the previous meeting, I'm blurring those two together too.
Oh, the previous
You're
meeting.
there for 2 consecutive commission meetings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll report a couple things, like, one is that at the.
Hold on, didn't we have I don't think there was a commission meeting between this committee meeting and the previous one,
You're
because the
right.
previous one was the day after.
You're right.
So I don't actually think I have anything to report on that. Sorry, but you were saying something.
Yeah, and then I guess, so we talked about that at the last meeting, but, well, there's a couple things I wanted to mention. Number one, I've kind of been following the Colorado RLA project a little bit, and they're actually still kind of working through the licensing issue. They're still trying to actually license it using what they decided. And I think there's a little bit of complications because it seems like their repository might have a couple other things that might have other licenses, and also they're not quite sure on which exception they want to use for the AGPL v3.
So they're worried about compatibility with the license of other stuff in their repo, is that what it is?
Well, I think someone needs to kind of like just document everything correctly, and I think they haven't gotten
Okay,
around to
yeah.
like how do you want to document multiple licenses existing in the repository.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of goes to show that it's better to work this out at the beginning.
Yep.
And then also I'll say a little bit more about this under the next agenda item, but I was kind of following the instructions for making something GPL v3 for a single source code file, and then I kind of saw, there's like step-by-step instructions on how to do it. And like their recommended practice is to actually put a license notice at the beginning of every file. And if they have hundreds of files, like I'm not sure they want to go with that approach. They might just do.
Yeah, but there are
That's
lots of
pretty
projects that do that. We do that. Like,
Yeah, I think
there
it's good.
are thousands of files in Linux, for example, or in MediaWiki or in other big projects, and yeah, you just do it.
Yeah.
Just write a script and run it.
Script,
Yeah.
So that, can I interject?
Yes.
There's one other thing I forgot to mention, that there actually is a commercial vendor that's closed source that's offering a COTS hardware approach. So it's very similar to what our goals would be, except it's
Which vendor is that?
proprietary. Clear, let's see.
Clear vote? Is that-
Yeah, Clear Ballot.
I think there may be more than one vendor actually that has a COTS hardware.
Yeah, but I mean, I just noticed they are one it's all based on new modern technology that's just a few years old. I'm not sure that, I don't think they're certified yet in California, but they're working on it. But if you look at their product and what they have, it kind of fits a lot of the
So-
descriptions of what we've been talking about.
Do they actually tell you like the model of, like the actual COTS scanner model that they use?
Yeah, like they say, you can use like this one, and this one, and then depending on, your volume and things like that, you might want different ones. So, so I think I included it there, but, in somewhere in my notice,
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you wanna link to it on our system, but just if you wanna look at what they have to offer, it's, kind of interesting. They also have some other, I think it's patented. So that was another one of my issues, is that, we may have to worry about patents. And, whatever we're doing, it's almost likely we'll hit a bunch of patents. So for example, Clear Ballot, the idea is that they scan images of everything, and then when their software says, oh gee, this is maybe an ambiguous mark, it can pull out all the ballots with ambiguous marks, and then there's a way that they can display it on a page where it's ranked like most likely to be not checked to be most likely to be checked. And then a person can just see like all these and say, yeah, I know all these up here are, what it is, and then they can click on an individual one, and then it'll just pull up the piece of the ballot image that they need. So that's like a way to help adjudication.
I'm guessing that cleverness is what's patented, right? Like not the general concept of that
No,
stuff.
just the fact that you scan it and you show pieces of scans.
Like sorting.
That sounds like a typically overbroad software patent. It's like, because I was trying to understand like how did they craft this patent so that there wasn't prior art for it?
Well, maybe nobody scanned the ballots and, made them visible.
Yeah, well, if the patent is narrow enough, then it's not, you can just
Yeah.
do something.
Yeah,
But
if
it
it's broad
doesn't matter
enough.
because there's so much stuff that's patented that has prior
Yeah.
art, in the software world.
That's true, but yeah.
But then if you wanna fight it, it's.
If you want to fight it, it's, yeah. And that's what I'm saying. If it's broad enough, it's probably garbage, but then you still have to fight it.
Yeah, okay, so also I just wanna say I think it is worth taking a look at this document, but the one thing that I think you might find interesting that jumps out at me is they say, like I said, I don't know if this is just placeholder text, but they say, under open source governance model, they say open source model BDF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I objected to that.
Wasn't this in the last week's agenda packet, or was it in last
It
week's?
was.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, yeah. Same document, right?
Did we talk about this?
No.
Yeah.
I think it might have been in last week's commission meeting packet, but not the committee meeting packet or something?
We talked about some of the topics that are in here, but I had not seen this
Okay.
attachment document
Oh,
in
yeah,
this
because the
format.
tech was after the commission meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think the commission meeting had this as a.
Okay, so,
Yeah, we didn't talk about this because I think it might have been too late to include, but yeah, I just thought it was kind of interesting, like, do they mean, like metaphorically, the city itself would be the.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, is the BDFL gonna be a person or an entity, and how does that work?
Yeah,
But they also say the assumed open source governance model,
right.
and
So,
they will have a justification, so I'm holding my breath until,
yeah, and, well, they
They
say
actually-
under section 2.2, it says, this section describes a list of assumptions, and it says, these will be modified, added to, or confirmed, so.
which
But
section?
they also, benevolent
2.2.
dictator for life is also there in critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, they say these can be modified though.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how they actually like flesh out 4.2, because I am not necessarily sold yet, but I'm willing to be convinced and see the rationale for it.
Yeah.
But I guess I would recommend they don't use those words.
Oh, that's
yeah.
a good point,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe.
Yeah. it's-
Well, it just, I mean, maybe we could understand what it
I mean,
meant.
we know what that means,
Because we
but it's-
know what open source is, but
The
most
world at
people
large,
will.
yeah.
Most people will buck heavily at those
It should
words.
more
yeah.
like be free and unencumbered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even, it could just be something like, I mean, even if they replace dictator with mayor or something, I mean, just something a little bit more,
Fearless
Democratic.
leader.
This is less flippant, yeah.
yeah,
It's,
okay.
Well, it's also kind of meaningless, I think, in this context.
Yeah, well, we could, actually, we could even recommend on that, just don't use that term. I mean, we could even do that today perhaps, but, does someone want to make a note for when we get to section 9? We can maybe make it. Okay, so let's take public comment on this item. This is member reports. Thank you, Carl, again for all the work that you did. Would you like to comment? Okay. So, all right, well, let's just, anyone else before we move on? Okay, let's move on to the next item.
Item 5, administration. Discussion and possible action regarding administrative issues, including but not limited to attendance at election commission meeting by committee members, the committee's website, and the committee's written reports to the committee.
Okay. So, just, so Secretary Chen, can you remind us when the next meeting is for the committee?
The next meeting of the committee,
Yeah.
we have that, the second Thursday of January.
Okay.
and this report is due on the 5th, right?
No, that's the 11th, I'm gonna be away. Yeah, may I please be excused?
17th,
Yes.
Ah, yeah.
the commission meeting.
January 17th.
Yeah.
Oh, January
Sure.
17th?
This report being due on the 5th, we
Excuse me.
cannot actually attach approved minutes from today's meeting to a document that's due before we have a chance to vote on the minutes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So if you change December 14th there to November 16th, then it
Well,
works fine.
let's discuss the report a little bit, after, let's hold off on the report
Okay.
just for a little bit. But, so the date of the next meeting, it's
For the commission,
committee.
for the committee would be the second Thursday, January 11th.
Okay, January 11th.
Okay.
January 11th.
I
So
thought we
11
were
is-
meeting on the 3rd Thursday.
No,
In the
that
new year.
would put you right after the commission meeting, and that's what you wanted to avoid. You wanted to do it before, so you would have something to
Okay,
report.
so I must ask to be excused for that one.
Okay. Okay. So we can change, I mean, we can have it on a different day,
Okay,
but what,
I'm just out that week,
Okay.
so.
Rowan and Carl, are you want to make that meeting?
That's okay with me.
The 11th, right?
Yes.
For some reason, I didn't realize that's when, I just didn't put any of that stuff on my calendar. Yeah, I'm good for the 11th.
Okay, well, do you want to, I mean, Secretary Chen, do you know if, what's the room availability like? Does it seem like the rooms are,
At this point, I haven't had a response from the building management yet. I can check that tomorrow.
well, let's just see, if we can all make the 18th the following week, maybe we could just.
That's the day after the election commission's meeting again. Commission.
Yeah, but I mean, if Tony can't be here,
Yeah, but if you have a quorum without me,
well,
Are you able to make the 18th?
yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm available on either day.
okay. Well, why don't we see, I think it's better if we can have more people. I think that's
Yeah.
more important. So let's.
I'm also available either day.
If the 18th is free, we can move in. So, okay.
So, wait, what did we decide?
If the 18th is, the room is open, then we'll have the meeting on that day.
Okay.
And we'll try to find out by the end of the week or so.
So we'll have it either on the 11th or the 18th, depending on room availability. Okay.
Yeah. and we'll try to nail that down within next
Mhm.
week. Okay, so, and then for the next commission meeting, who is gonna be there?
Wait, so, what item are we on, Chris?
Administration.
Oh, 5 is okay, sorry, I thought 6 was administration, my bad.
Yeah, so,
I thought we were on a special item for the report.
oh,
That
that's
was,
a part
which
of
is
it.
not the case. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to get this.
Yeah, no, you're doing exactly what you should be doing, given that we are actually on that item. I thought we were one item down from.
Member Profundo is scheduled for January 17th.
Okay, okay,
Commission.
so, okay, well, let's just keep him on that because, he hasn't reported yet to the commission, so.
Yeah, and he can also listen to the audio recording of this
Yeah.
meeting.
All right, yeah, so let's move on to the, well, actually, why don't we talk about the license stuff? that you
Sure.
mentioned? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I was going to ask a friend who is a software licensing lawyer about how to deal with some things. I didn't get around to doing that because things were a bit crazy the last few weeks. But Chris, in absence of Chris having not heard from me, just did some things, and those were actually pretty reasonable. So he put, I'm going to forget exactly what you did, but he put some text in the README, and he put a licensing file in, licensing the code in the repository, which is mostly these build scripts, under GPLv3, and the text of the document itself under CC by SA 4.0, and then documented in, I think, the README somewhere, saying that if people want to contribute, then they need to agree to their contributions to be released in a relevant license. We discussed if we needed something like a contributor license agreement or something like that, but I think we're fine without, because Chris is the only one that ever merges anything to that repository, and we don't need to protect against a case where he forgets to check that an outside contributor has not made that agreement.
Yeah, so Carl, at our last meeting, we had voted to, I told you by email, but we had voted to license our document under CC by SA 4.0, and then the code under GPLv3, and you agreed?
That's right.
Yeah, so, so the issue that Rowan is mentioning is that if we get contributions from the public, they need to agree to, the same license terms, but because the number of contributions is so
Yeah.
small, we can just remember to ask them.
Yeah, and it's also very heavily gatekept, right? It's gatekept in terms of you being the only person that merges, and also only after we have discussed things in this meeting. So
Yes.
there's already so much gatekeeping in place that we're not going to forget. There's not going to be stuff that slips in
Yeah,
without someone having been asked to agree to the license.
that's right, yeah. And, and if anyone has any suggestions about the formatting of how the license shows up, right now, at the beginning and end of every page, there's an icon with the CC by SA picture. And then there's a link to a copyright page that has all of our names to attribute. And we can update that over time. So that's done, and.
On page 5,
Oh,
or on item
so-
5 rather,
uh-huh.
item 5, the date is wrong.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Okay,
There's more things that are wrong.
yeah,
Yeah,
but that's kind of basic.
Yeah,
First
no,
thing
we'll-
you see.
We'll get to this.
Okay, I thought we were on item 5.
We are, but there's other stuff in
multiple
item 5.
topics.
other
Okay,
than-
sorry.
So,
I made the same mistake.
why don't we let's start talking about this draft written report that's due January 5th, and that member Profundo prepared
Because clearly everyone wants to.
so kindly. And why don't we just, we'll entertain edits to the document,
Mhm.
and then we can vote on it afterwards.
Yeah.
But I've got a few things, but why don't people just start saying things that they notice?
Yeah.
Well, change January 5th, 2017 to 2018,
Okay?
because that's the
Oh,
minutes due.
yes, good call.
Well, that's your error.
I had not noticed that one. There's another minor error in the title page. On the second line, OSTVAC should be OSVTAC.
Yeah,
The
Yeah,
acronym for our
okay.
committee is wrong.
Uh-huh.
And as I mentioned before, there's a comment asking for the approved minutes from this meeting to be attached, but that's impossible.
okay.
Okay?
Yeah, and the meetings, of course, they list 3 of them, and there's a 4th one, which is tonight's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll change that to 4 meetings, we'll list all 4,
Yeah.
and then,
Vertically,
Oh, you wanna listen vertically?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
looks like we've been busier if you listen.
Right. Now you can make the font bigger too.
And then if we want to, we can attach the
Do we
minutes.
wanna include the minutes for each meeting?
I'm not really sold on that because
Yeah.
it also links, just a couple lines up, it links to the past meetings page where all those minutes are available anyway, and the minutes from the past meeting are especially large,
Okay, yeah.
so.
And it does get into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we'd rather kind of focus on what are the key activities and decisions that
So-
we've reached.
Maybe, okay. So I actually have a comment, that link in the second paragraph, that
Mhm.
should really be the about page for
Okay,
the prior updates to the commission. And then, but how about after the meetings, we can just have a sentence saying,
right.
the minutes for those meetings are at this link, and then we can link to the past meetings there,
Yes, that's a good idea.
so.
So what was this about the about page? I didn't quite
So-
understand.
It's just where the link went.
What?
The reports to the commissioner are listed on the about page rather than under the past meetings page.
Oh, I see.
But then he's suggesting including a link to the past meetings page at the bottom of this page saying the minutes for all these meetings are at this link. Because that link is actually useful, just not what the text says it is.
And then maybe we can even, yeah, okay, that's right.
Okay. Then on the second page here, in the second section, there's some language about conferences that people spoke at, and I had a question because it says here that Tony spoke at an open source conference in Bangalore. Did you actually speak there about open source voting efforts as well?
I
or-
mentioned it. It was not the principal theme
Okay.
of my talk, but if you were to listen to a recording, I did use the term open source voting.
Right. Do we want to change that language to make it less misleading, perhaps?
I think we should change the language.
Or you could strike it, I mean, because it was a minor,
Right.
It does say they spoke in their personal capacity, so,
Yeah.
it should be plural, their personal capacities.
But Chris, didn't you also speak at?
Yes,
Yeah.
that was my next thing.
Yeah.
It says that I attended the conference in Berkeley that really Chris spoke at, which is the more important thing to mention.
yeah, although the commission already knows, I mean, I've already reported to them on that.
Sure, but it's
So-
like mentioning that I attended it is kind of bearing the
Yeah.
lead, right?
So we could just say, member Katao attended a conference in Berkeley that Chair Giordanic spoke at.
Yes.
And then I can look up the name of the conference and just.
It
find
was
out.
NVRTF, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was called something like Take Back the Vote or something. It had some catchy.
Oh, because that was the organization. Yeah.
some catchy-
Take Back the Vote National Conference, NVRTF.
Yeah. Oh, then the NVRTF is the National Voting Rights Task Force. That was the organization that put it together. Yeah.
And then, Tony, for your conference, do you wanna strike it totally, or?
I don't think it adds anything.
Okay. Okay, we'll just strike that then.
If we had gotten into some kind of a side discussion about,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So
But
in the third paragraph,
Mhm.
are we ready to move on?
Well,
So I guess in terms of my participation, I don't know if it's relevant or maybe it's a negative, but I've also been participating in the National Institute of Standards and Technologies of voting data interoperability standards.
okay,
That's.
But I'm also participating as an individual
Mhm.
and not representing the,
Right.
this committee or the San Francisco Elections Department. So I had to make that clear to
Okay.
the people there
did,
So the
that I'm completely independent of all
the heading for the paragraph that we're talking about now is building awareness for the ESTA open source voting effort. So
It's not related to open
Exactly.
source exactly,
But
except,
did you build awareness in your capacity?
I mean, I think it's definitely worth mentioning. I'm just
Yeah.
pointing out that it drifts away a little bit from the,
I mean,
Purported
people who have
purpose of that
voting
paragraph.
on their radar now know about another effort that they didn't previously know about.
But I mean, but Carl, like while you're participating, were you like talking about the project and building and educating them about it, or not really?
well, I introduced myself in that respect, but,
Okay.
I mean, they're more, so the idea is, you know, this interoperability, the data format standards is really what could facilitate, you know, modular,
Mhm.
open source software. So, I guess it's relevant in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
context. Also, they tend to be, like heavily vendor dependent and heavily,
Yeah.
county officials, and they don't seem to like care that much about openness in the public,
Mhm.
but that's just my personal
Mhm.
impression.
yeah, and I guess it's good for people developing open standards to know that there's actually open source efforts going on at all. And what their needs are is quite important.
And actually, I did mention some open source software in the
Mhm.
context, because one election official in Wisconsin was saying, oh, well, you know, we have like all these small counties, and they just call in their you know, they hand count it and call it in
Mhm.
over the phone, and like having all these fancy computer stuff, you know, may not be applicable, but I said, oh, probably there'll be some open source software that could take, you know, the spreadsheets that they might do manually,
Mhm.
and then be able to convert it into these formats.
Right.
I mean, I think it's worth, we could have just a sentence.
Yeah,
at
I
the
think
end.
there should be a sentence about it, and I think, you know, even if that is like technically not exactly the right paragraph, it doesn't fit anywhere else, so let's
Yeah.
put it there.
Do you wanna just say like, in his personal capacity, Member Hague is participating in the, and then just, can you state what it is?
It's the
NIST,
National Institute of Standards and Technology, standards for election data interoperability. I know that's kind of a long buzzword, but if you want to, or just to say the NIST election data standards.
It's a catchy name, okay. Alright, that sounds good. Got
NIST
the-
used to be NBS.
Well, it's also associated with the
SG?
VVSG. It's actually part of VVSG.
Okay,
It's a technical advisory committee of the VVSG that is sponsored by NIST,
okay.
and it's also related to the EAC. So I
Well,
noticed.
let's-
No, I'm not suggesting that's here, but just,
Have a whole diagram.
yeah, you actually offered some clarification on VVSG and EAC and all that in another change, which seemed fine, but it's, the NIST effort is part of that.
Okay.
I don't know how you might
Yeah,
wanna
yeah,
say that.
your glossary is gonna have to include all these TLAs and FLAs.
Yeah, well, how about if like maybe Carl, if he just emailed me the name of the group,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
we could just include that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So Don, TLA means 3-letter acronym, and FLA means 4-letter acronym.
Oh, you haven't heard that one?
No.
You haven't heard enough TLAs, I guess.
No, exactly.
So there's something else I would like to add. I think Tony, you were the one that made the motion, but we also passed a policy that, you know, the members of this committee should educate. So I
Uh-huh.
think that would be a good way to like lead into this section.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yeah, I think that's good, and,
So at the beginning, we could just say edits the October meeting, the committee voted.
yeah, adopted a policy that the members of the committee, acting as individuals, would,
Are encouraged to.
yeah,
Okay. And we could just look up the minutes for that wording.
yeah.
Are we ready to move on, by the way?
Yeah.
So in the evolving recommendations document, I think that paragraph is fine, but it's missing a link to the actual document.
Yeah, but I didn't like the structure of the sentence. I was rewriting it on the fly. The TA continues to work on a recommendations document that is aimed at informing the city's approach to developing, maybe is aimed at providing guidance to the city for developing an open source voting system. Because
that's
informing
good.
gets used in a
Yeah.
kind of a,
I like your wording.
okay. Don't ask me to do it again.
No.
It's recorded now.
And then I think maybe we can say at the end of the second sentence, this document is being developed iteratively and in public view on GitHub. Something like in the same way that
Right.
the committee would like, the open source project.
In a way that is consistent with open source projects,
Okay, in a way that is,
consistent with, yeah. We're
well,
eating
I
our,
think it's more than that, it's almost
yeah.
it's sort of
It's
like,
the same way, really.
well,
It's,
yeah, yeah.
In the same way that open source projects are developed.
Yeah, but we're eating our own dog food.
yeah, same way that.
Have you
open
heard that
source-
one before?
No, I haven't.
So
Yeah,
I-
they call it dog fooding, that's what Google and whatnot do when you.
Oh, I didn't verb,
thought they-
no,
Wow.
no, I didn't verb the noun.
But that's what they actually went to.
Yeah.
we do say dog fooding. It's like using your own product.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think this would be a good spot and have another paragraph to mention that at our last meeting, we voted to license our document
Yeah.
and our code under those two licenses. Also consistent with,
Yeah. So while we're on this topic, in an old Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, Calvin said, voting weirds language, or verbing weirds language.
So, yeah, and did, any thoughts on my suggestion to add a link to the recommendations document to the paragraph about the recommendations document?
well, yes, I like that, but I was thinking at the last report, we actually we included.
Oh, we
attached-
could do that too.
But we could do you want to do both? Just attach the current?
Yeah, I'm happy to do either. I guess if we include a link, then people can find updated versions in the future.
Yeah, so we could just say, we'll just add a sentence saying the current version can be found at the following link and just,
Mhm, mhm.
yeah, okay. Okay, this is a small thing, but I feel like the recommendations document, maybe just remove the quotes and all the subsequent,
Yeah,
subsequent mentions of it. It's just,
Yeah, I don't like those.
so just only on the first one. And,
I'm skeptical of those even, but sure.
what?
I'm skeptical of those even, but that's just because I don't like scare quotes.
Yeah. We should probably have a title for our document too, so we don't have to,
Mm-hmm. Like a proper noun name.
yeah. And then also, Ms. Pasilkin's first name, I think it's Jesse with an IE, I'm pretty sure.
I was wondering that too, but I'm sure that's easy to verify.
Yeah.
And as long as we're on typos in that section, the second paragraph of that section says specifying everything in unrequest. The third line of the second paragraph.
Oh, A request?
Yeah, I mean, it is an RFP, but then he expanded the acronym.
I see. So I have something actually in the first paragraph on page 2.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying it has learned that Colorado is, I think we should just say Colorado is conducting.
Yeah, it has learned that.
And then the last sentence, Texas abandoned its pursuit of an open source voting system. I think that should say, due to the lack of a complete combination of RFP responses.
Yeah.
Because I think that's more,
Oh, because it wasn't really concerns about constant complexity. It
no,
was,
it's
yeah.
just, they factually didn't have responses.
It is JESSIE.
Okay,
It's also in the meeting minutes spelled that way.
yeah, I remember that, taking a look at that. Okay. So, anything else? Oh, do we want to mention, something else, in this section on building awareness, we might as well name the 2 conferences that we agreed for the future, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Maybe it could be after the comment about Carl, we could say,
Yeah.
at the November meeting. we voted to, allow the two of you to speak at those two conferences on behalf of the committee, or as commission.
Yeah.
Right, we have to submit proposals and they have to be accepted. We don't just
Which-
have.
Oh, well,
Which I
we
did.
authorized, we
Yeah.
authorized you.
Yeah,
Yeah, to submit proposals, yeah, and which I think for you, it hasn't opened yet.
right.
For mine, it closed, but I don't think they've notified anyone yet. I should check, actually.
Okay, so anything else? So this is gonna have just one attachment, it's going to be the actual recommendations as of after this meeting. And, let's take public comment on this item.
Yeah, I have a couple questions about, it's not about the document itself, but the LA County voting system. Do we know when that's supposed to start being used?
Well, I don't think so. I know they submitted the tally system for certification about in September, which is just the vote by mail component. But I don't know offhand.
Okay.
Is that open source or is it still in question or?
We think it's not gonna be, I mean, I think it's not gonna be open source.
But is it custom software that LA commissioned?
Actually, let's let
Sorry.
her finish and then, yeah, we'll
Okay,
touch on it.
so the tally system for vote by mail, that's not necessarily the tally system for the machine?
I'm not 100% sure. I mean,
Okay,
it
so
might
they
be the
might be
same.
separate tallies.
Well, it's possible, I think the tally system might also tally the in-precinct machine ballots
Okay.
too.
But we don't have a lot of information about that tally system.
Well, I mean, it could be on their website, I don't know, does anyone else know, maybe, to answer the question? Yeah, not sure.
The information on the website is a little misleading because, I had some information from Larry who had an inside connection.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get back to that, and then, okay, so anything else?
General questions.
Yeah, so there was a previous meeting where the registrar of LA County said that the stack was gonna be open source, but the code itself would be publicly owned. So that's what he had said. So which leads me to believe that it's not open source.
Well, public domain is not open source, but,
Or publicly owned. is that-
yeah, well,
It's not the same.
no, I know it's not the same, but sometimes it's not clear what
Well,
things.
public domain is open source.
Yeah, but I don't think this is.
It doesn't have a
public domain.
license, it isn't. It's,
this-
it's something else.
But it's not gonna be public domain.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a number of edits. It seemed like we were all amenable to all of the edits. And is there any other edits people want to suggest? And what I'll do is I'll mail this, when we approve it, I'll email it to the commission, before January 5th.
Mhm.
Should I just put the date that I send it, or how do you?
I suppose so, I mean,
I'll just put the date we send it, and then I'll post it on our website and let the committee know by email that it's been sent. Is there a motion to adopt this document with the edits that we made?
so moved?
Okay.
Second,
All right, moved by member Cattell and seconded by member Wasserman. Secretary Tran?
Chair Giordani,
Yes.
Member Hague,
Yes.
Member Cadal,
Yes.
Member Wasserman.
yes.
Vote of 4 carries.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move on to the next item.
Item 6, committee goals and assumptions. Discussion of possible action regarding committee goals and assumptions.
Okay, I just kind of left this item on here. I'm not sure if anyone has anything to discuss about it, but we've had it on the agenda in the past. So I don't personally have anything on this. Does anyone else? Okay, public comment? Okay, then let's just move on to the next item.
Item 7, project background and terminology. Discussion and possible action regarding project background and terminology, including around voting system components and other voting system projects.
Okay, so here I have 2 patches I submitted. One is, these are both going off a previous meeting. I had, we had talked a little bit about the requirement on interpreted languages, and then I learned that there was a VVSG update in 2015, so I just wanted to kind of update the information we had. And then I also added a few terms that came up in our conversation around, when we were talking about like the services and the infrastructure that I thought we might want to define.
Tell me about Outstack.
Oh, OutStack. Does anyone want to answer Tony's question?
I'll take it, since I was the one that asked.
Stacking ballots.
Yeah, I'm the one that asked about it originally. Outstacking is when your software fails to recognize what the ballot means, and so it puts it in this separate physical stack
I
for a
see.
queue for a human to look at, as opposed to the main stack of these are the things that I scanned and understood.
Somebody has verbed a noun.
Yes.
But it's in common use.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
you'll
it's-
see it in the brochures on voting.
Yeah. Yeah, so the scanner has 2 output queues, the main one and the I don't know what this is one.
Okay.
Except that the modern way to do it now is you just scan them and you present the electronic version
Right.
to the adjudicators,
Yeah,
as opposed to
physically
Physical
moving.
stack.
paper.
yeah.
They can look at the paper if they want. So,
Right, but now you can present a photo to the
Okay.
adjudicator, which it's gonna be one of those things like the floppy disk icon for saving, right? Like the term is gonna stay the same, and it's not gonna have any relationship to what we do in practice anymore.
well, also they can pull ballots. They use the scanners as a counter, so they scan the ballots and they get stacked in order, so they don't have serial numbers on them. So if they're doing a risk limiting audit or whatever, and they want to pull, these ballots, then the machine goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then stops, so you can pull it out. and it keeps going.
Hefty.
So basically, they're using the scanners in non-scan mode just as to use the sheet feeders in order to pick ballots.
Is it counter?
Right.
That seems a little dodgy to me.
Well, I mean, it assumes that your ballots don't ever get out of order.
Well, no, what I mean is using software to count them. Like when you've identified the random ballot that you want to review,
I see.
using software to find the ballot.
That's actually
I mean,
really
in
fun.
practice, it's probably really difficult to subvert, but like, it seems dodgy to me that the software plays a role in its own audit, in being audited,
Oh.
right?
That's a good point.
But it's probably a minor
We
thing.
could also have somebody count it.
Yeah,
1, 2,
I don't
3.
know how tall these stacks are, but the whole point of an RLA is that you minimize the number of times you have to do such a thing so that you can
Or it
do more
may
of
also
things.
just be used for inspection.
Yeah, if you're just inspecting a ballot to be adjudicated, that's fine. It's just during an audit, that seems odd to me. I have a brief question for Chris, just about, because this question came up when I read this language. The VVSG, the first vCenter voluntary, but the EAC is going to require all new voting systems to be tested against it. Does that just mean that they have to be tested against it, but not necessarily pass that test? Like, how is required and voluntary reconciled in this context?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that, I think in California at least, I think it's a state law that a system can be either certified against the federal standards or against the state standards, so maybe that's the sense in which.
Right. So in
Like,
practice.
if you wanna have it federally certified, it needs to satisfy these,
Okay.
but,
So
do you know the answer?
Well, it seems like the state standards for certification are really radically different than these guidelines, because these are like somewhat procedural and, a few things, but it's not really a certification process like what the Secretary of State does, and, we have to submit all the code and they inspect it and evaluate it. my impression, I mean, of what I've read.
Let me see, I might have taken this wording right off of the EAC website.
But as far as I know, that all systems have to be certified by the Secretary of State.
Mhm.
Yeah, so this is what the EAC's website says. Further, on January 6, 2016, the Commission adopted an implementation plan whereby all new voting systems would be required to be tested against the VVSG 1.1 beginning on July 6th. So is that what's written here?
That is what you wrote. I mean, it retains the ambiguity that you had in your
Yeah.
thing just comes from them.
I just took it verbatim.
That's,
So.
yeah.
So just to give, like, there's an election result, they're just coming out with a 2.0 format. But I think the VVSG is gonna say, you know, our open source software has to produce that data format for results.
Okay. All right. And this is also an item where we could, you know, Carl, the stuff in your memo, a lot of that falls under this topic. You know, around, you know, project background, you know, like the existing open source software components that you researched.
So I can propose some diffs for the next meeting, like
Yeah.
you did here.
And also, remember the glossary things you did?
Right,
too?
I
You could
can,
revive that too.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'll try to package a subset of what I put together that's applicable to what we're using.
Okay. Yeah, so, okay. Does this, I mean, this is small, but does this look okay to people for the,
Yeah.
Looks okay to me. I mean, your to-dos are just inserting some to-dos, so that's fine.
yeah. Okay, I'll just move that we adopt these, the changes in these two documents.
Second.
Okay, let's open up to public comment on this agenda item. Okay, seeing none. Further discussion? Seeing none, Secretary Chan?
Chair Giordano,
Yes.
Member Hay,
Yes.
Member Patel,
Yes.
Member Wasserman.
Yes.
4-0 carries.
Okay, so is there anything else we want to talk about on background terminology? I know we still don't have any information about Prime 3 in our document.
Yeah.
And does someone want to volunteer to maybe research that?
Yeah, I already
Well,
sort of have some, but what,
Let's
could
do-
you,
yeah,
could
why don't
you
you-
define what you would like?
I think what it does is important.
Like a more detailed description of
Kind of like the scope of
what,
it.
yeah, what it, how it works and what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've, anyway, part of my memo was I'd be glad to
Okay.
write more detail on those things that,
Okay.
on what I've investigated.
So you got that, okay, great.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, let's move on to the next item then.
Item 8, project management and procurement. Discussion and possible action regarding project management and procurement, including topics like modular contracting, agile development and government, and incremental approaches to the project.
Okay, so this item, you know what, we had the speaker at the last meeting. We didn't get the documents yet from her. I should have followed up with Larry on that. But I did want to have a recommendation that we could pass, just basically acknowledging that there are parts of the city government that are interested in Agile, and I think it would make sense for the department to work with them. So that's one of the recommendations. And then the other one is something that occurred to me a few months ago, that if we're going to have an interim stage where we're scanning third-party ballots, we need to have a way of getting like the layout of those ballots in a structured format. And it's going to be some sort of, I imagine it'd be like a human-assisted process. Of course, if the vendor already can give you the structured thing in advance, then we wouldn't need this, but.
Yeah. So you're saying this would be software where you like scan an example ballot and then possibly hand mark or with automated guidance mark where each
So-
circle or arrow for each candidate is.
So that's actually part of the functionality of Open Count.
Okay, yeah.
So, but that also brought to mind that, another module, maybe optional, but at least it's possible, and that would be ballot layout creation software. So that would take the contest and candidate definition data and then be able to produce whatever it is needed for the voting machines.
I think we have that listed in here.
We do?
Under, under the section, the background section of voting system, we have we list out the components for kind of like the generic paper ballot system.
I mean, I know you said conversion, but,
Oh.
I'm not sure. I mean, ballot layout is kind of a more specific, keys.
Are you saying software that would generate the paper ballot layouts?
Either paper ballot layout or data files used by voting machines. And whatever is necessary to print the ballot, so what you'd see on the screen and what would be printed.
Yeah, how in scope is election definition stuff here?
I'm just saying if you write software that's the voting machine, then you usually need some sort of software to prepare the data that it uses.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a separate deliverable.
No, it's in scope. I mean, the system assumes that we have this structured data, and if we don't have it, we're gonna need software to help.
Sure,
create it.
I mean, you're gonna have to have structured data for the election definition, and you're gonna have to have some sort of tool to program it into this system, but, I mean, what do we currently use for printing the ballots? Like that's a separate system, I assume, right?
So it's I think it's a semi-automated system right now. I think it may be manual. I think they send the files to the printer and they print it out. But
Sure, but I
do we
mean,
use a
for like
tool,
marking up, for like taking, someone goes in and like takes a list of, the handwritten list of contests or like some data about contests and like marks up the ballot, right? And like makes the layout of the thing
layout,
with
layout.
something.
So do you know if
And-
we use GEMS software to do that?
No, we don't use GEMS. I think it's Dominion.
It's
Part of Dominion voting system.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah,
so-
I guess that's true because they're the ballot counter
Yeah.
counting system, they also have the ballot
Right.
layout. And same thing with Clear Vote, they also have a
Mhm.
ballot layout component.
Yeah. So I mean, we could elaborate this for what we need to build.
I mean,
And so this analyzer is sort of the reverse of that process.
Yeah, no, I agree that your thing should be in here. I like this. What I'm trying to tease out is the software that Carl's talking about, like what actually lays out the ballot
Today,
today. Is that part of the system that we would be replacing with this, or is that part of like
Yes.
a different EMS system?
it
Right.
is.
In the former case, then I agree with Carl, there should be something in the document.
Well, just
about
that we should
components.
enumerate it as a module kind of at a parallel level to what you've put in, like with your, picture analysis and all that, which I thought was very good. So I think it just fits in. And then one other component that we might want to add also is auditing.
Okay.
And so, the idea is to do it in a staged and modular way. So, like auditing or ballot layout, might be further down the line. But I think it's useful at least to enumerate that as
Yeah.
an item to be considered.
Okay.
But you might want to do auditing early for the same reason that you write test cases for acceptance tests early in your development process, that you've got kind of this parallel tracking going on.
Correct. And also, I think, in like Chris's example in the other document later, he lays out a scenario for development where you first use it in kind of as an auditing role. So it might even make sense to develop some auditing support software, along that stage.
Yeah, it's your,
implementation.
So-
right.
Okay, so this section is modifying the sort of the incremental first phase, and where we're not actually responsible for printing out the ballots, we're using the third-party proprietary one.
Right.
But
So-
it still makes
But-
sense to have people thinking about auditing
Yeah.
the results early.
Yeah, so my question is, do we want to include the auditing component in this first phase?
Well, I mean, there is something somewhere surely about what's needed for it to stand on its own legs, right? I'm not, I mean, the diff doesn't provide enough context for me to know exactly what section of the document we're in, but if you're saying it's the first phase, so we don't really need to talk about ballot layout and a variety of other things, and that's fine, but there's a section somewhere surely about.
Yeah, so I'll explain to you how it's currently structured. So right now, we have in our background section, we have a section where we describe in kind of the generic paper ballot system, what are the 10 components of that?
Mhm.
And then one of them is called ballot layout. It doesn't list auditing, but that's kind of without making all the different choices, are we using vote centers? It was just sort of a generic.
Mhm.
And then we, for this incremental phase, we drill down a little bit deeper and stuff. So we don't actually have a section where we go into ballot layout for what we actually want to build. We don't have that yet.
Okay.
It's down the line a little bit more.
So also think for auditing, there's a little difference depending if you do the typical precinct recount versus risk limiting audit, which is the sort of newest technology, which
Mhm.
I'm not sure it's even authorized to do that, but so the open source Colorado RLA is an example of, that actually might be usable as open source.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the idea of having the auditing component go in the first phase because, yeah, if we're doing something new, we'd want to have good auditing for it.
Yeah.
And then,
And then I'm not familiar enough with the structure of the document to say where things like ballot layout should go, but I think that the points have made here that it should go somewhere.
yeah, I think that would be if we were to have a phase 2 or something. If we wanted
Well,
to do a phase 2 or 3 or.
But surely, if, one of the arguments for, oh, okay, so you're saying we're presupposing there will be such a phase that we haven't really talked about what that would mean yet, because presumably the goal of this project is to get rid of the Dominion system entirely and replace it with something else. And in phases, yes, but we do want to think about what it takes for the thing to stand on its own legs.
Yeah, so I guess I think that the document can use a whole section where we actually drill down into each component.
Mhm.
I think we do need that, and that's not.
Okay.
And
But anyway, I think your addition of the ballot layout analysis is very good.
okay,
Mhm.
okay.
I would, just one picky thing is that you put a hyphen in open source down near the bottom.
Yeah, I see it.
That doesn't belong.
Where is that?
It's in the second paragraph, although it looks visually like the third paragraph on the,
It's here.
it's the second plus
Oh.
after the second interruption of pluses.
Okay. Okay. I'll
Which page?
remove that.
On the
Yeah, he's
printed
talking-
version of his ballot layout analyzer patch.
It's 3/4 down.
And this
Yeah.
prototyping here, that's coming out, right? Because prototyping doesn't have a hyphen. It's a single word,
Where do you see that?
right in the middle. That's a removal.
Oh,
isn't
that's,
it? That's coming out, or is
So
it?
no, that's just context.
Okay,
That's not being modified in this diff.
So
I mean,
prototyping does not have
Yeah.
a hyphen, it's a single
But
word.
if you use it as an adjective, isn't it supposed to be hyphenated?
I don't know what you're pointing to.
it's used as a verb in this case, but it's part of the context,
Oh,
not
yeah,
part of the
it's-
change.
Oh, so
Although,
maybe that was, so that's our existing language, that should be.
or it could be existing language that we
Oh,
just
yeah,
approved.
prototyping has a clause hyphen.
Yeah, and
But I think
yes,
open
that's a typo,
source
but
should be hyphenated, but I'm not
Nobody
sure.
does it.
Well,
I don't know.
I'm saying is anybody an English major?
sorry, no.
Yeah, it's, well,
It's there on the back page too, on the picture interpreter component section,
The hyphen or no hyphen?
with a prototyping with a hyphen.
Oh, yeah, okay, he did.
Okay.
Oh, but it's the same exact text, so I don't know how that
Yeah.
got there.
The diff was,
Or he just like mispasted something into the diff after he generated it or
Wait.
something.
So are you saying that there's a,
So that text, prototyping and testing samples of ballots from past elections and or the interim voting system, period, end of
no,
sentence?
it's actually, that sentence appears in multiple spots.
Oh, it appears in multiple spots, okay.
okay,
Do you wanna just change that? We could just take that out, we can include that. in the
take out
motion.
the hyphen,
Okay, okay,
yeah. It's one word.
yeah. Okay. So everywhere in our document, we have hyphen, okay. And I do think, I mean, so as we add more, I think we are gonna, you know, like, as you refactor code, as your code grows, we're gonna wanna
Yeah.
be restructuring your document.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
ways,
for sure.
So, if people have ideas on how to organize, you know, bring that.
Mhm.
I think the hardest part of all this is just that we don't, there's like a decision tree that, Carl, you have an item about this. but
Right,
it's
in
like-
fact, part of your document also is sort of the same, I mean, it's listing different alternatives and it's
How do you-
options, so it's kind of,
How do you describe things with all the different combinations?
I think I went into a little more detail than in your document, but it's
Yes.
the same basic idea that I think we should enumerate the options and alternatives and what things need to be
Yeah.
decided on.
Okay, are there any further suggestions on this? And I'll open it to public comment on this item.
Regarding layout list of ballots,
Uh-huh.
wondering where the decision to, say, for example, you know, the mail ballot is not going to have a QR code, right? And some machine at the precinct, you know, if we're gonna, say, for example, like the LA model, has a QR code, you have two different types of ballots. Like, at what point, I would think pretty early on, you wanted to make that decision that they are not going to be different, so that you can have the same type of tabulation system. Right?
I mean, more than one type of ballot, you're saying?
I don't think what you just said is true. My understanding of the system with QR codes was that the QR codes would be stamped on as the ballot was cast, but I might misunderstand that.
Right, but if the machine, the precinct machine is tallied via QR code and then a mail ballot can't be, obviously,
Well,
because it's pre-printed.
What I mean is the way I understand it is that when the voter at the precinct puts the ballot in the scanner, it feeds it to the box, it stamps the QR code on it. So you could conceivably do the vote by mail thing just the same way. You might not want to because you might want to use high volume scanners, but my understanding of the QR code proposals, which is incomplete, is that could be the same.
So actually, the QR codes, a lot of times they're essentially a digital version of
Of the scan
printed
results,
answers.
right? Yeah, but that's the result of what the scanner saw is then,
Well, if it was created by software, then it prints out a human readable version and then also a
Mhm.
QR code. And sometimes the QR code has a digital signature.
but this is for ballots that were generated using a machine, you mean?
Right, like
Okay.
the remote accessible vote by mail,
Mm-hmm,
they all print QR codes
right.
as well as a human readable, but
So-
I think to answer your issue, the issue is, does the scanning software read the human readable part or only the QR code?
What were you in the middle of your comment, or was it just a question?
Well, I guess my question would be, are you deciding to have two different types of tabulation systems if you're gonna have one that's QR code based and that's not because of the mail ballot?
Okay.
scanned and tallied, and then build a parallel software to scan the same ballots as part of the release cycle or development cycle.
We as a committee haven't really talked about QR codes yet, have we?
Yeah, no, we haven't even got to the point of listing that as a decision that needs to be made.
But it also goes back to a more fundamental decision, which is, do you use pre-printed ballots or do you use on-demand ballots? Because if you have pre-printed ballots, then you're probably not going to have QR codes on most ballots. And vote by mail wouldn't even be special. Like, the accessible ones would be the special ones that have QR codes. Whereas if you use on-demand ballots, then everything that's not vote by mail is going to have a QR code. Because my understanding is these QR codes would only appear on ballots that were generated on demand, which in a parallel to the current model, for example, only the ones using accessible devices would be generated on demand, and there'll be a small minority of all ballots.
Yeah, well, I think it's something we can weigh in on. I mean, we could have a recommendation around QR codes. Yeah, I mean, do people have thoughts, feelings about it, or no?
I mean,
Well, I sort of, what I was in the upcoming agenda item is, what I thought would be useful is to list all those different decisions, like that's one.
Is it one of
One of the examples, I don't have that one specifically in there, but, so what I thought would be good is to just get together and figure out all the different options and issues there are. We may want to make recommendations on some, but others we might just want to list them as, here's a decision that needs to be made and the pros and cons, and that might be made as part of the design process.
yeah, and it's, like I said, it is also interdependent. Like, this is what you would be able to express in the decision tree, is that it's interdependent on the issue of whether you use pre-printed ballots or on-demand generated ones for like the majority use case. Because if you use pre-printed ones, then you're not going to have an opportunity to put a QR code on like 90+% of all your ballots.
Right, or in Chris's document, he also listed the different options of
Yeah.
a ballot marking device, ballot on demand, that's a
Mm.
lot like
Oh,
a
yeah.
ballot, or completely pre-printed ballots.
Yeah. Right, and a ballot marking device, I'm guessing, would take a pre-printed ballot and mark it.
Not necessarily, it can also.
It could also generate one
just-
from scratch?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I guess in either case, it could add a QR code that says what it did, but.
I mean, the LA system is like one kind of example of how it might work. And you might even have a two-stage process where, they select your ballot type and then it prints just like a header and a code on it. And then the rest of the ballot is blank. Then you go to the voting machine, it'll scan the header that gives you the ballot type that it's supposed to be, so that initializes the machine. The voter makes the selections, then says okay, and then it'll print the rest of it, and then that's what you stick in the ballot box.
I mean, from what I've heard people talking about, I think as long as when you're doing the audit, you're looking at the human readable portion,
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt to have the QR code.
Mhm.
But I think that the concern with QR codes is like whether it's encoding additional information that shouldn't be there. I think that's a criticism I've heard.
Yeah.
I think you
Or
can't really
people
go
don't know what
wrong.
it is.
Huh?
That people don't know what it is.
Yeah, people don't know. I mean, it could be putting your name in there and you don't know it. But,
Well, if the ballot images are public, then anyone could check what's in the QR code.
well, no, but it could be like steganography, where you hide.
Right, you're
information.
saying there's a fear that like information that shouldn't be public or shouldn't be on a ballot, even for state law reasons, could be hiding in a QR
Like
code
an
conceivably, and it might be
encrypted date
difficult to
time
figure
or
out.
something.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think you can't go wrong by not having a QR code, but yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're doing the audit, you can tell which ones were mail ballots and precinct ballots because of the QR code. So,
But
Yeah,
if
well,
the QR code
That's
can
another good
attach a
point.
digital signature, that you can prove that that physical piece of paper and those results were created by, a machine on,
Yeah.
that's, basically you can generate a digital signature that's valid valid for one day, voting day, you know, at a precinct,
Yeah.
and so you can't just take the paper and replace it with another
Yeah,
fake
there's-
fake one, so it's higher security.
There's some interesting
But
cryptographic things
that's
you can do
like
with it.
that's one of the trade-offs that I have in my list of decision.
But as for vote by mail ballots being identifiably different, aren't they already counted separately?
They are, I mean, this is an issue not just about QR codes, but like, yeah, remote accessible voting ballots look different.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. It
Accessible voting in the polling place.
looks different, yeah.
Could
They
look,
look different.
yeah, so, yeah, it's a larger issue.
Yeah. And I think what you said is right, like you can't go wrong not having it. You certainly shouldn't. I think what you said to me about the LA system too, where it like actually does on-demand printing of things, what I think about sometimes too is like, what is the fallback, right? Like, what if the power goes out?
Yeah.
What if like your computer system's stable?
That was another one of my questions. is
With the
does it-
current system in place, you can, I mean, it would take all night, but you can actually go and hand mark and hand count all the ballots if you really wanted to or had to because of extreme circumstances. Whereas if you rely on a printer, the printer can run out of ink or can be without power or other nasty things can happen and then you're not able to cast votes.
Well, now you raise an interesting question. You can't check into a hotel if the computer is down. You can't fly if the air traffic control system is working. Do we want to establish as a goal that that whatever we do, that there be a manual way to
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that idea.
to have the count, that it not be dependent only on the proper functioning of,
Right.
I mean, we could have an earthquake on the day of.
So LA system, they have a no power requirement.
Which is essentially, essentially the same thing.
Well, no, I mean, what if there's something like a worm
In the software or
and
it just
the power's
malfunctions.
still on, but the software's not working.
Yeah, so that there be a manual fallback, or whatever we want to call it,
Yeah, I think it should be possible to run an election manually. It might be inconvenient. It might take you days to count, especially when there's like an RCV rate, multiple RCV rates on the ballot. It would take you forever to.
Well, I think
But
the
everything,
essentially
marking,
but-
that means that you're using mail ballots.
well, I think the marking is the bigger issue,
Yeah.
because I think we're gonna have the problem is with the accessible device. Right now, I think, is there any accessible device that doesn't rely on software?
Right. That's probably that might be a relatively intractable problem.
It's called a human interpreter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So I mean, you can have someone,
Yeah.
yeah, but
Say,
they don't have privacy though. I mean,
that's true.
Yeah, but I don't think that there's another way to solve the problem.
I don't know.
I mean, how did we do accessible voting before computers?
Had a friend vote for you.
Yeah.
your proxy.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, this might actually be a question for, Fred Neeson. He wrote this letter.
Yeah,
I
how
could
do you
ask him.
that kind of stuff? And
So,
So do we wanna close off that section, go on to the next?
yeah, let's do that.
Because I think we're kind of discussing things that are on
we're
the.
discussing random things at this point, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So were we on item 8? Was that
Yeah,
where we're at?
We have
And
two
did we vote on whether to?
Typographical.
You did not.
Okay, so I move that we accept Chris's patch with the very minor typographical changes that we proposed.
Yeah, there's two patches.
Oh, is there?
One for,
So it is, so there is, okay, both patches then, with the removal of hyphens that we discussed.
Okay, I second that motion.
okay. Is there further discussion? Okay, seeing none. Secretary Chan?
Chair Giordano,
Yes?
Member Hague,
Yes.
Member Vital,
Yes.
Member Washington.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, let's, so for the next meeting, I'll try to follow up with Larry and see if he can get, some of the documents from the last meeting,
Mhm.
project procurement. Okay, next item.
Item number 9, committee recommendation. Discussion and possible action regarding committee recommendations on the subject of requirements, open source software development processes, software architecture and design, hardware, intellectual property, and testing.
Okay, so at the last meeting, Larry had requested, thought we should have time for reviewing kind of the sections as a whole. And so I just decided to include the recommendation section for today. And we can, we can discuss if you'd like to go over this, in whatever detail today, but,
We got hyphenated open source down near the bottom of that first
we
page.
could have,
there
we
you
could
go.
have a blanket, it could
Edit.
be like a style guide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For hyphenations. And then I do have two patches. One is,
We want to discuss those first?
sure. There's smaller, these relate to things
Where?
there's the FAQ.
What is it?
After the giant printout of the fourth section, there are a few pages
The
back.
two at the back.
So FAQ, and then the other was on testing. That's something that I raised at the last meeting.
The FAQ one, I actually found a typo. At the bottom of the first paragraph that you added, you're missing the word is after sure. Oh, no, sorry. You're not. Never mind.
Okay.
I misinterpreted the sentence. What you did is fine.
What about countermeasure? Is that a single word?
Eh.
I'm not good with hyphens, honestly.
Yeah.
I can look it up if you want. I mean,
I've seen it as one word before, but I don't know if that's
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
it looks to be one word. No hyphen there.
I think so.
Okay, I'll scratch that. Okay.
Usually people have problems with apostrophes, but you're good with apostrophes.
Yeah. So are people okay with the content of the second, or what's called number 2?
You mean the thing
Yeah.
with testing?
No, well, I'll just-
Or you mean, FAQ?
FAQ
number
question
2.
2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
I'm not sure if we actually made a recommendation as to how much should be open source, but maybe at a future meeting we could actually just state that, if we haven't already, that all of it should be open source if we haven't already.
Oh, as for number 3, you mean?
Yeah.
This is more of an FAQ, it's not a recommendation. but-
Oh, I see. You're saying we should also say something that's affecting the recommendations section. That's true.
Yeah.
So just
We might have already,
kind of a follow-on to the comment, I mean, I think it's fine, but, another thing that we can say is that, well, two things. One, if the computer equipment uses secure boot, and that secure boot recognizes a digital signature from, like, the California Secretary of State or something like that, then that's more evidence, or you can
Yeah.
make it, the hardware can be designed in a way that it can only load software that's digitally signed, and then if the public can reproduce the build process, then the public can also verify those digitally signed images.
Yeah, you can get it. We know how to make hardware trust software, but if we don't necessarily trust the hardware, then we're lost. I think was Chris's point here. You could make mention of secure
But
boot.
everything that you said is correct.
Yeah, you could make mention of secure boot. You could say, like, we do know how to have hardware check software, but then you're still trusting the secure boot implementation in the hardware.
Well, also the fact that the public at large can authenticate
Ah, yeah.
the builds and can authenticate the digitally signed software that the machines use.
Yeah.
there is a way for the public to check that?
Well, if part of this open process is that you provide the build environment, and then people can replicate the build environment. So, like, for example, containers are kind of a thing that's commonly available now, and you can download and reproduce it, and you can repackage a container with a build environment, and then you can build the system, and then someone could compare the binary images.
No, but is there a way for someone to walk up to a voting machine in the precinct and like
No.
check?
No.
Okay.
No, so what he's saying is you can, if you are a party that, so for example, say you're San Mateo, and you want to run the San Francisco system on your hardware. So you trust your hardware, but you don't trust San Francisco. Then you can, it's with secure
Confirm that
boot,
you
you
have the
can.
right software?
Hmm?
You can confirm that you have the right software?
You can confirm that you have the right software, and that the software has been cryptographically signed by the Secretary of State of California. And you can confirm that that binary that you have that has been signed by the Secretary of State of California corresponds to the source code that the manufacturer that San Francisco claims it corresponds to, because you can take that source code, build it, and it will produce exactly the same binary.
Or if I'm some open source voting activist as an independent person, then I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be worth putting a sentence in.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
put something in about that, but then what you observe is still true. If I'm San Mateo County, then I can do this and I can trust that San Francisco isn't doing anything nefarious, and that I'm getting the right thing and that I haven't been attacked.
And so
But
for
if I'm a voter in San Mateo County and I don't trust the county government, then we're done.
So for binary equivalence, we use check digit mechanism or something different?
Well, actually, binary equivalence is a little more complicated because like in the development, it might insert timestamps into the object code, so
Right.
you'd have to write a binary comparator that would.
Well, so what Debian's been doing is they had a lot of issues with that, and they have been quite successful in getting north of 90% of their packages to be completely reproducible with no timestamps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They found some good tricks to get rid of the most common sources of
Okay.
non-determinism.
I don't know about that, but I'm.
You're absolutely right. Like what you're saying is definitely a big problem, and like almost every package had a build timestamp in there somewhere, and they just had to.
But you could write a comparator program that would redact the dates from it.
Yes, or you can build you
Then
can
you'd have to
build it
trust
in a way that you don't use the real build timestamp, but you use a proxy for that. Like you don't usually care about when it was built exactly. You care about which version of the software it was built
Right.
from. So you can instead use a timestamp of the last modification to the repository, for example, which is consistent across
Oh, is that
rebuilds
how
and the
they
same
do
thing.
it?
So that's one trick that they
Okay.
use, and then there's other things like the build path you might have to standardize, and the cop out is always there's a build info file which just says what the parameters for this build were. So, and then there's a script that you can use to recreate those parameters for. So like, the cop out is you can set your system clock to the right time and then build it and then it will be.
Yeah.
So, but Debian is actually, and there's a larger reproducible builds project, but Debian is the main thing they've been focused on.
But I think
thousands of
if we
packages.
set it as a recommended goal, that,
Yeah.
that the build be publicly verifiable, then.
Right.
This was one of your tests, right?
This is exactly what I meant by reproducible builds, and yes, what he's saying too, if the build is unsigned, I'm happy to write up some language about that.
So the other thing I think maybe you could, in the answer to the FAQ, is that basically we need an election process where we assume that all of the electronics is not trusted, and so
Yeah.
the overall process is that we have this audit and verification, and that at minimum, if there was any tampering anywhere, it would be at least detectable.
Yeah, and I think with current technology that might also be worth breaking down is we have the technology to, at least in theory, whether we deploy that in practice or not, detect whether an external, like the county can detect whether an external party is trying to tamper with with its software. And of course, you can have physical processes for the county to try and prevent external people from tampering with its hardware. But the public doesn't have a way of verifying that the county or someone internal to the county didn't tamper with the hardware.
Other than participating in public.
Yeah,
audits.
but I mean, current practice around securing voting machines is so terrible that I'm not sure that nobody in the world has good processes for securing voting machines, even the ones that think they do.
Well, all the EMSs run on Windows.
Well, what I mean is, I just mean the physical security, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to store these things in warehouses for years at a time when they're not being used. And back when an activist group was trying to and eventually succeeded in getting electronic voting machines ruled unconstitutional in the Netherlands, they called up a county and said, "Can we borrow a voting machine?" And they said, "Sure, we'll put one in our car and drive it over." And they just took it to a guy's house, and there was a mayor of a much larger urban county was like, "What the hell just happened there? That should not be possible. That is completely illegal." But the smaller counties didn't know any better, and they just gave a random academic a voting machine. It's a
Also, I
complete
think-
breach of protocol. So
Also, I think security has tended to be security through obscurity.
That
And-
too,
and
it was,
that
yeah.
they, you know, one of the differences with open source is that the security can be validated by the public at large.
Yeah.
And including cryptography experts.
Yeah,
So I don't think any voting machine uses anything close to what's actually feasible.
no, it doesn't.
Or,
And-
and what maybe should even be recommended.
Yeah, it doesn't, and we can do a lot better, but I'm just saying that like, as soon as you start talking about physical hardware security and chain of custody, people are able to implement that kind of thing in the immediate time frame around the election because they're used to having to implement chain of custody for physical ballots and stuff like that. But when it comes to those things just sitting in a warehouse for 2 years until the next election, the current practice is pretty terrible. So, I mean, theoretically, I guess you could accomplish it, but even then, you as a voter might not trust everyone who works for the city. And you might not trust that the city didn't have some internal breach where like a city employee was able to gain access through legitimate or illegitimate means to this warehouse and tamper with things. So I think the gist of Chris's answer still stands that you need audits
Oh,
because
definitely stands.
yeah. But you can say though, and that might be worth framing that way too, you can say that at least the city, if the city trusts all its employees, then the city is able to protect against external parties from interfering with technologies like Secure Boot.
In the language that you're gonna write around reproducible builds, can you maybe, I'm not sure if this is the same point or maybe like a related point, but just about how it, well, I guess it's the same point, just guarantee, it allows the jurisdiction to guarantee that they have the right software.
Yes,
Yeah, so that's-
it's, the reason why the original like reproducible builds project, which is not that old, it's only been going for about a year, I think, maybe possibly two, but I don't think any more than that. The reason why they started it is because they were trying to solve the problem of, we're just like pushing trust issues up the chain of like, okay, do I trust my internet? Maybe I trust my internet connection, but now do I trust a mirror that I'm downloading this Debian package from? And when I build it from source, I get a different result. How do I trust that that's
Okay.
the same build? So they decided this was the way to solve that, that you can verify, you can, as a convenience, download binary packages for people and not build everything from source yourself. But if you're worried about it, you can build it, or you can just like publish the build hash and have like, what they actually do is they have multiple independent parties just download these source packages and build them every day and see what the hashes that they get, and they just publish those hashes, and then you can check the
Hopefully
hash
they
of your
agree.
package. And,
And hopefully they.
hopefully they agree, and if they don't, that's a problem and the package needs to fix something. And then you can take your package and just check that the hash is what everyone says it should be, and you can be reasonably confident that not everyone's
So
trying to.
this is stronger than just seeing that your hash agrees with whatever's on the Secretary of State's website, because you're actually, you can get the
Yes,
source.
so if you,
Yeah, the point is that's why you wanna make the build environment,
yeah,
you know, as part of the deliverable.
yeah, exactly. And for if you're building a container, then all you need to really require is that container, every time you rebuild that container, it has the same hash.
Well, how does this, is there like a standard way of doing it if an installation involves like potentially many files spread across many directories?
So
How does that-
usually what happens is your deliverable ends up being one or a small number of files.
Okay.
Like if it's a Debian package, which is the most common example, it's just a single .deb file, which is like a tarball basically of a bunch of stuff. In this case, it could be a Docker container, which you can roll up into a single file, and then so you creatively define your deliverable to become a single
So you have
file
an
basically.
executable, some sort of.
Yeah,
well,
some sort of package or
Well, yeah, usually, like Secure Boot is like this whole layer of,
yeah.
this whole chain of things. So you start off with basically the bootloader itself is digitally signed and the hardware is configured. And in fact, you can build microcomputers so they're burned so that they have to be signed by a particular signature. And then that bootloader loads the real bootloader. And then that bootloader reads the whole set of files and validates the.
Right, but there's two separate things here though, like Secure Boot and reproducible builds are separate but complementary things.
Right.
So Secure Boot means like you have code that is digitally signed, and you have a layered way to make sure that the computer can only ever run code that is signed by a key that it trusts. So then you can say like, okay, I trust the Secretary of State of California, and I can tell this that I know that I'm running code that was at some point signed by the Secretary of State. So if I trust the Secretary. So I know that I wasn't meddled with when it came down from the Secretary of State. But you would further, so that's what secure both solves, but you would further like to verify that when the Secretary of State signed that binary package, which might be like a tarball of a bunch of things, might include binary things, right? It's a derived resource from the original repo. You might further want to verify that they built it correctly, or you might want to be able to prove that this version is the version they built to obtain this binary.
So
And that's where reproducible builds come in.
What's wrong with the approach of, this is just exploratory question, but like, if the secretary didn't release the, if they just posted the source files and then the fingerprint for the source files, but not the fingerprint for the build version, like why do you, that's because you don't want to have to build the software.
Well, you're trying to verify two separate things. So with secure boot, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it impossible for the computer to physically run untrusted software. And your definition of trust is like it's been signed by some key. So now you've moved the trust problem to the Secretary of State, or some authority that you decide you trust. You could, in this entire scheme, you could still have the Secretary of State surreptitiously building a different version that they sign and have that be running on the voting machines. But you at least get to the point where you at least have the, so, okay, again,
I'm saying, let's say that the build process is not reproducible in the strict sense. And then what if the Secretary of State just made the source files available and signed the source files and said, hey.
Oh, everyone built this.
Yeah.
And then the Secretary of State presumably would also publish the hash that they expect the results from the build process.
But then you don't have a secure boot.
That's fine. Oh, no, because then the Secretary has to sign the results.
Well, some trusted party has to sign the result, and there's a state law that said you're not allowed to run software that's not certified by the Secretary of State.
Is that because you don't have to be trusting the compiler or something? Is that the issue? Or?
Well, no. So reproducible builds take away the issue of trusting the compiler. That is actually, there's a wonderful paper about that, about how you can write compilers that are not trustworthy, which is why the reproducible builds project happened. But I think what Carl said is more convincing. When you have a secure boot implementation, you have to sign the actual binary it ends up running. That needs to be signed by a key that is trusted by the chip. So you could download the code from the Secretary of State's website, verify that it is what the Secretary of State signed, build it yourself, but then you have to sign it yourself and run it on your computer. You could do that.
That's an implementation detail.
It's an implementation detail. But I think Carl makes a point that is very nice, is like, there is a state law that says that the system that you run has to be certified by the Secretary of State.
Well, not only that, but you also have to submit the whole build
Yeah.
environment.
So
as
this
part
is
of the certification process.
This is an excellent way to like tie the technology and the legislation together really tightly, where you say it is literally impossible to run code that has not been actually signed off by the Secretary of State's office. And it's, yeah, what you're saying is mostly equivalent. In this case, in your example, the county theoretically is able to modify it, but
Okay.
But actually, I see it as two steps. One, the county or vendor or whoever packages it, digitally signs it, gives it to the Secretary of State.
mhm.
Secretary of State notarizes it by saying, okay, now it's certified. So you not only have the Secretary of State's digital signature, you have the urgent
Right.
news digital signature. So somebody in the elections office couldn't somehow tamper with the content.
So what do you think is going to happen as development moves to the cloud? I mean, people use tools like Cloud9 now, which doesn't have any development tools running on your machine. They're all running on AWS somewhere.
So, I mean, I think it just goes to, it has to be independently verifiable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
'cause if
what.
you have-
By building it in a parallel environment somewhere else, whether it's
Yeah.
in a non-cloud system or cloud system or whatever,
But
as long as
if-
it's all independently verified. And you could even set up automatic verifications like the
Yeah.
Debian builds are done at like several different spots. So you could
Right.
have, the Trusted Vote Consortium like set up their own cloud.
I was just responding to the statement that you have to be able to deliver the development environment.
Oh, I see. You have to, well, so when you get the software certified, you have to give them everything, basically.
Yeah, but the everything
Well, how do you
is,
certify the development environment? Well, it's.
Well,
When
you
it's
don't
out-
need to
when
do
it's
the
out there
development
in the
environment.
cloud, yeah.
You don't need the development environment, you need the build environment. You need enough information that you can
yeah, but I
reconstruct
mean,
the
we're
environment
way
and software
past the
builds.
days of linkers and loaders.
Right, but I mean, it is cloud-based, and so, I mean, anytime you use, I mean, unless you want to
I mean, I can
audit
put.
and verify
yeah,
your
but,
whole
yeah,
development, but.
I can install the, the JetBrains development tools on my machine and do everything right on my machine, and then it's done. And that's a very different beast than using a random collection of tools that are out there running in
ultimately you can't trust
cyberspace.
it, which is
But
why
it
you need
doesn't-
Chris's answer.
Well, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how you develop it, it only matters how you compile it at the end, right?
Well, right,
If I take
but
the software
you're-
off of GitHub, I'm just trying to compile it, my compilation isn't gonna run in the cloud.
That's what the new tools are doing. Cloud9 does its compilation.
Yeah,
in
sure,
the
but
cloud.
why would you do that when you're building for production?
Because you're not gonna have a real machine that does any real computing,
Well, it also doesn't matter because with reproducibility, yeah.
Yeah.
But-
Okay.
I don't think it affects
We've gone a little bit far afield.
Okay,
But I wrote down as a to-do to wrote some language about this for
okay.
So I have
next
some
time.
comments on this document that we're looking over, so I don't know. We wanna,
Well, let's do the
Sorry,
patches first.
Let's do the patches first, yeah.
oh, okay, sorry.
And then the second patch is around, it's something I mentioned at the last meeting about how if there's like test data that's separate from the underlying code, it's sort of, it's helpful. Well, actually, there's 2 points in here. I put the thing in about, we want to have digital ballot pictures from elections. And then the other one is keeping the test data separate from the actual code, which can allow, it's a lot of advantages around that. Like it would enable us to have multiple implementations of the software
Mhm.
component, and then it would.
Are you just saying put it in a different GitHub repository, or?
Yeah, along, but in like
I
a,
mean, isn't it sort of inherently separate because it's not code?
well.
I think what he means is that
Not everyone
the
does
test
this.
cases are not written, if you naively write the test cases, they might be written so that they only run with the software that they were written for. And I think what he's saying is you want the test cases to be like in a data format so that you could, with relatively little effort, take completely different software to perform the same function and run the same test cases against that software.
Right, because the code is a black box and it just has to produce the same results with the test data. But
So like a collection of ballot images and expected
Custom
readings, for
images.
example, or a collection of ballot images and an expected resulting tally from that collection, or something like that. You could express that in a format that is not specific to the application
Or
you're
even just
writing this
an
for.
independent project.
Yeah,
An independent deliverable is a good idea. I mean, like OpenCount has some test data with it, but it's like so trivial and it's not at the level of being its own project.
Oh, okay.
And you also want to have the test data around for regression testing. So, I
Mhm.
mean, just as, to be more efficient as you,
But yeah, so there's different kinds of testing.
yeah.
So one is this like sample data for exercising and for
Mhm.
software development. And then other than that, there's regression testing, which is testing specific components of the
yeah,
software.
and testing specific bugs that you had in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how much you want to get into detail.
Well, I think just,
You do say where possible, so that,
yeah, and really just establishing like that this is a good thing, and then.
Well, you can pop up to a higher level and talk about quality assurance in general. That maybe, the development process and the validation process does give us.
Posted on the, yeah, we're having a meeting right now for the council.
I'm going.
So that the process, in fact, has an identifiable QA component that's, addresses these different kinds of testing, and may even include usability testing and testing of the alternative formats Because everything we do, we want to have a counterpart that says, yes, this is what we want, this is correct.
But I think it's useful to, I mean. I think
But as a high level, then we
That's a
can-
part of the sort of
The
project development requirements, but I
Right.
would put like this standalone test data as a separate little mini project or, you know, module in our development
Yeah,
cycle. You know,
sure.
we have like all these different components, so, you know, as deliverables, and one deliverable could be this standalone test data. Just to mention it as a,
Okay, so you're suggesting that,
I mean, I think it's fine to have this here, but just when you looked at, you know, this other document on incremental approach and the different, you know, pieces,
oh, I
you
see.
might have like, test data sets
Yeah.
as a
Well,
project.
how about if we had, as this insert second sentence after the first, you know, separate from the software application and in an application agnostic form, and then in a new sentence, it could just be like, these can be separate deliverables.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and also just later, as we develop our
And then-
recommended
yes,
deliverables,
then
we
we
can
can do
include
that.
it, that's all.
You can-
So I think your statement here is fine, but I'm just saying, we should keep that in mind to,
Yeah, yeah.
produce
I
it
agree.
as a section to,
When we're enumerating components
Right.
and things. Yeah. Okay. I mean, can I just ask, do any of you know of like well-known cases of this? Like I know for like different like browser things like HTML, there's like
Mhm.
different
Oh,
known
like
test
ACID.
suites.
Yeah.
Huh?
Like ACID, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
stuff like that. This is kind of a common approach.
well, also, I don't think anyone has produced an open public record of, you know, ballot
No.
image data. So anyone who wants to develop open source
Yeah.
ballot counting software has sort of a problem. They have to kind of gather their own stuff, so
Yeah.
at minimum, not only would serve our needs, but it would stimulate the,
Yeah, it'd be a good
The-
trove of data to
the-
publish regardless.
to public at large, you know, possibly make other alternative or maybe better software or whatever.
Like another well-known example is with like machine learning stuff. There's like data sets,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and
That's a better example,
if you- yeah.
actually.
handwritten digits and things.
If you actually have not only valid images, but also what the human consensus is and what that ballot means,
So,
then yeah, you could even write like a machine learning model
so
for
the,
interpreting ballots.
I don't know if it's possible to get it, but, if there were the outstacked ballots that needed to be adjudicated, that
Mhm.
would be interesting to include in the test data set.
Yeah, yeah, all of
Yeah,
them.
the language does say something about a variety of ballots, but like, my dream is just to have an entire election's worth, right? That's just the easiest way to justify
Yeah.
that you have a good sample.
Yeah.
So one of the things Open Count did, you know, because it's scanning ballot pictures and not just, you know, spots on the machine, it did a better job of detecting and guessing what the correctly adjudicated
Right.
answer was than the normal machine.
But it's also like, I don't remember who said it, maybe it was you, about machine learning, like it's just, it's a really good data set to have for just researchers in general, like, you know, I'm sure there's PhD students around the country that would love to have hundreds of thousands of ballots with interpretations.
But I don't know if I guess it's nothing urgent in that respect, but maybe we could investigate what San Francisco has that we could use.
Well, I've already started, I've already raised the issue, and the problem right now is the current voting system we use, this is not a built-in capability. So,
So we'd have to have a scanner.
yes, and that's,
First.
it would be like an extra thing that would need to, and it's kind of, it's
What's-
asking a
What's the
lot.
storage issue?
Well,
Are-
that's-
Are there any issues with like pulling stored ballots?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are.
Legally.
They're sealed after the canvas. So,
Yeah, they're sealed, and I think you can only unseal them if you have like an articulable suspicion of something bad or whatever
So we'd have to have a scanner in place
during the
during
canvas.
the next election.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean-
you would have to have something, like you would have to have some device that can optically scan some number of ballots, and not necessarily even interpret them, but.
Yeah, I mean, so
Just get
this
those
is
images.
something that, I mean, you know, the director kind of is following what we're recommending, and if it's something that they can do, then I think,
So when's the next election?
June.
yeah. And we could, I mean, this could be raised during commission meeting too. So-
Yeah.
I mean,
But I
but
mean,
it,
it might be feasible, well, it might be worth the San Francisco election department buying a scanner
yeah, well,
or having one available.
well, that's
to-
even harder, cause I mean, we can't be asking for them to like buy stuff.
Okay.
Well, so what I want to say though is there is, I don't know how valuable it's going to be because these images are going to be of ballot types that we're not even going to be using, so.
Oh, I see what you're saying,
It's-
yeah.
I mean,
Well, but
it's
just for
also
test
not-
data, to test, if you have picture analysis,
Yeah,
then you'd like to get, some sample of real ones.
yeah, but,
And then if you have to do adjudication, like, it's even more important to get,
We're also gonna have a fresh data set of RCV tally data though.
yeah,
Are
we've
you
got
saying-
lots of those already though.
Okay, yeah, I didn't.
CBR
so
form.
you're
yeah.
saying that June won't have any RCV?
No, it will. It will now. We have a mayor's election in June, don't we?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be, and also District 8 is having a supervisor race.
Yep.
Is that a special election or something? Who left?
Is, well, State Senator Wiener, right?
Oh,
His
is this,
successor was
oh, the
appointed,
special
but-
election for that is only now? Okay.
But Jeff Sheehy was appointed.
Ah, I see, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, that's just the way the laws work
Yeah.
when the.
Yeah, no, okay, that makes sense. There was an appointed replacement and then at the next already scheduled opportunity.
Yeah, he showed up at our door one day last week or the week before.
No, I know, I've met him. I just didn't realize.
Yeah,
That he was
actually,
Scott Wiener's
well,
appointed
I met
replacement.
with, I announced this at the last commission meeting, but I met with him about the open source voting project.
Oh, cool.
So if you ever do run into him, you should,
Yeah,
Just
my
talk to
wife
him
was
about it.
there, I wasn't.
yeah, talk to him about it. Okay, okay, so, yeah, so we've got these two patches. Let's take public comment on this item. This is, number 9, committee recommendations.
So we're only talking about the two patches, right?
For now,
No,
yeah.
not the giant thing.
We'll do that next. Any public comment? Okay, seeing none. Yes, so are there any more suggestions on this, the patches?
I think these are good. I mean, we talked about a lot of stuff that we might want to do in the future, but I think the patches as written are good.
Okay.
I move that we accept them.
Yeah, would someone like to make a motion?
I just did.
Okay,
A second.
all right, seconded by, Member Hague, Secretary Chen,
Chair Giordani,
yes?
Member Hague,
Yes.
Member Vidal,
Yes.
Member Washington.
Yes,
Carries 4-0.
Okay, so yeah, let's move on to this next, so this is the full, section 4. And the way this is currently structured is the recommendations are divided into like, I don't know, like 15 topic areas. How many are there? 18. And you can see that there's about maybe 8 of them that we don't have anything for yet. This, I mean, obviously we're not going to get through all this right now, but,
Mhm.
but we could also talk about how it's currently organized, or maybe
So I thought
things that we
I thought
haven't
it was
covered.
great, but, like I was saying, it sort of overlaps with what I was preparing, so.
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking, part of this document actually goes into those decisions and some of the trade-offs and pros and cons, so I was thinking maybe you could just sort of separate that, so you have a whole section on just all the decisions and discussion, and then
I agree with you.
the section that you have, which is kind of defining, well, the incremental approach and the different modules and, describing those in a little bit more detail. So
Yeah.
I think that's good.
So 4.3 is called requirements gathering, and 4.4 is called requirements. And one of the things that I think we could do better here is to identify the different personas, if you like, who are, or the different actors in the system. Because, as we envision what's going to happen, there are going to be voters who are going to show up, properly authorized at a precinct. There are going to be people, who, maybe as we go to voting centers, there are going to be another class of user there. There are going to be people who are going to vote absentee or remote. There are going to be military deployed people. And if we identify the different actors who may need to use this system, we then can get better coverage of all the things, all the requirements that we have to fulfill to make sure that we cover everybody properly.
And by actor, you mean types of voters? Or
Not necessarily, it's types of voters, but also there are actors on the system side that,
So like precinct workers,
or there are the people who are responsible for sending out the ballots to remote people or something. I mean, I don't know the whole list. But to kind of figure out who's involved. I mean, there are voters, there are system people, and there are people who administer the system. And in each of those three categories, you can subdivide by, all the different kinds of people in those categories. It's a check on ourselves, if nothing else. It's a way to say, do we build a system that meets the requirements for each of these classes of people? So that's what I was thinking.
I like that idea. Carl, do you know if the NIST, was there like an election processes NIST working group?
well, there's they call it election modeling. It's
Yeah.
really complicated, it goes through the whole,
Would they have the different actors as part of their group, do you think? Is it-
I'm not sure, I don't know the answer to that, or if they list it explicitly. I mean, they have it in their flow charts, but it may not just be enumerated as such.
Yeah, but
Which
we,
I think maybe it's worth just doing that enumeration.
extracting,
Yeah, I think if we were to have maybe some new section in our document, basically of what should be built. This is getting at what you were talking about earlier. What you're talking about might be a good first section of that section. Who are the people, personas?
I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah, right.
You have personas, then you have components,
Mm-hmm.
and then we could have the
Right, in the components you can reference which persona, yeah,
test-
yeah.
Yeah, and you can work through this in a traditional way. It says, okay, what's the scenario for this persona to cast a ballot? Because there's a different mechanism. I can walk up the street and go to the precinct and vote, but I might also send in a ballot by mail. I might show up at City Hall and cast a vote.
Or you might bring your mail ballot into the precinct.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of cases.
Is this getting into building the system, do you think?
No.
Okay.
It's sort of saying it leads us into
Yeah.
testing, which says how are we going to make sure that we do all these things? How do we satisfy all these different kinds of users? And it can also be incremental, which says that the first version of the system is going to
Okay.
provide a solution for this, and this.
Yeah, I guess you're saying here are all the actions that need to be taken, here are the components that interact with that. so
Well,
that you can
that
more
you
easily say-
derive that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But
So that
then
you can
have
more
to-
easily say, like, if I build this component, then these are the workflows that satisfies and these are the ones that it doesn't.
Well, or take it the other way, that says, if I'm in this category, what are the components that I need to have
Right,
working
yeah.
properly to, cast my ballot and have it recorded accurately.
If we had a section of, including like the personas and then the things that could be built, what do you think the name of that section would be? Would it be like the,
System overview or something?
deliverables or?
Well,
system
I mean, it's kind of like a high-level
It's the
overview.
no, it's the context. It's the system context.
I mean, it describes the system in the sense of like, well, I mean, it's an overloading of the word system maybe, but the system not in terms of the software system, but like the whole election process system maybe, or whatever you want to call that.
But you know, if you go read the literature, they talk about contextual design, and if you look at Cooper's book about face or something like that, I mean, that's really how they go about the process of identifying, well, who is the system for, and then what are the users. If we're going to do Agile, then you have to have user stories, right? And now you have a user story for each class of user, how they're going to use this system. And that's really what Agile pushes.
So did you just volunteer to propose a list for the next meeting?
I didn't, but it looks like I'm going to end up there.
You gotta be careful what the minutes are gonna say.
Huh?
You're gonna have to be careful about what the minutes
You have to be
come out.
careful what I say.
What you turn out to have
Tony
committed
will
to.
do
Wasserman discussed the value of identifying the user stories and the personas who are going to be active in the context of the election system. There you go. I wrote a sentence. It's on there.
I mean, would this be appropriate, because we already have a section of the background section called components, then would it be like, is this kind of background, or is this more
I think it's,
a recommendation?
you know, I mean, if I'm going out and going to do Agile, I'm going to do a sprint, I'm going to have, here's my user story, this is what I'm going to implement in this sprint, right? So this is, it starts with, you know, who's involved, and it ends up with sort of structuring the work that you follow in each step of an Agile process. So it's just a different way of looking at things.
But I think it is background information, and it's
Yeah.
nice just to enumerate it just as such in one spot,
Right.
Yeah, okay. So,
because it's used all over the place, like all the decisions about like accessible voting or
Right.
precinct voting or.
So our recommendation at the outset is that the vendor identify, you know, when we talk about an Agile approach, then we can say the vendor can create or use existing user stories around these different kinds of voters and structure the development in a way that you know, enables each of these user stories in turn.
okay. Yeah, so I think, yeah, we may want to subdivide our background section, because it's getting
Unwieldy.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's getting unwieldy. So we could have, you know, what you're suggesting can be a new section or subsection. Okay, like that. I also think that, I feel like the incremental approach section is also getting unwieldy and should be broken out.
Which is kind of ironic.
This is kind of, what?
Which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, it's sort of like, because we're kind of getting into, it's almost sketching like a plan. It's not just a.
Yeah. Well, it's also like,
a
it
recommended
says there
plan.
should be components. Here's a description of all of the components, which is, and then you should build them incrementally, and here's how you could do a rollout. But like the component description, part of that section is pretty large.
Yeah.
And
But I think it's good that those components are described.
yeah. But that need not be a child of a
And
section
I
called
mean, it
incremental
says
approach.
possible first component, it's not,
I mean,
it's
Yeah.
kind of a suggestion, but I think the components themselves are, in some ways self-evident. I mean, there's other things that are based on decisions that need to be made, but at least the ones that are listed are, I think, it's a good way to classify it, and it makes sense to me.
I mean, do you think maybe today we could just kind of decide, we could break out incremental approach into a section after recommendations? It could be something like
We could also,
recommended plan or
yeah, maybe.
So,
Well, I don't know, I sort of like the way that you did it here, Chris, because you say incremental approach, you like develop, you modularize it, make components, okay, now here's what components mean, so.
well,
it-
all I mean is taking that section and just moving it into its own section.
yeah, so,
I mean, that's fine.
so here's the thing, for me.
So-
Is we can do things incrementally in the sense that we're gonna build this component first. But within each component, the other thing we've said is that we're going to take an agile approach to developing it,
Yeah.
right? And those two, in this current version of the document, they're not quite merged together in a way that makes that clear.
You mean this is only doing one of the two things that you're saying?
Well, I mean, when you're doing things in an agile way, is it on a component by component basis? Or are you taking all those components and, which comes first in effect, the component or the agile?
Well, I don't know, agile to me, there's good things about it, but it can also be abused. I mean, people say.
Of course.
Healthcare.com, one of the reasons why it
They hacked
died
it.
was because they used agile.
Yeah,
I mean, you can use it to say, oh, well, just do something without figuring out what we're doing.
but the point is that we say in our document, in our recommendation, that they should follow an agile approach. So,
But that's even ambiguous.
right,
Whereas, incremental development is
but they're
clear.
different. The
Yeah, I agree.
incremental says we've got 6 components, and we're gonna do this component, then we're gonna do that component, then the other do the, but it doesn't talk about how we do each component.
Right. But I think we've already said that agile is part of the.
Yeah, but
requirements.
that's also what my mild criticism was, is that this section is called incremental approach, but then it actually ends up also being the section that defines a whole bunch of components, and that's why the section's so big. Because it doesn't, and maybe these things are not very separable, but it doesn't just define the notion of an incremental approach, it also defines into not incredible, into a sizable level of detail, all the components that you have, and then how you incrementally deploy them. So
Maybe
it's,
just having a separate section components and then that we can independently edit.
So here's what I had in mind for this. I feel like I guess, in terms of San Francisco government, they're into like the idea of like phases. And this is sort of like the idea of what would be a phase 1.
okay, yeah.
And then you have, phase 1, you have these 5 separate components that would be built. And this is really, when it says incremental approach, it's more incremental as compared to like everything all at once.
Yeah, so it's incrementalism inside of phase 1, you mean?
Yeah, and
Well-
you even talked about how it could be used, like just kind of on the side or for auditing, or then like in parallel with some of the existing equipment and so forth.
Yeah,
So I thought that was good as
there's-
well.
yeah.
I mean, besides the development, the way it's being used can be used incrementally.
What if it was the title was changed to something like proposed first phase or something?
Sure.
Well, you say possible, first components, I mean, that's,
Well, this would be.
Yeah, but in the subsection of that, you were talking about section 4.2 as a
Yeah,
whole.
I'm suggesting, let's take section 4.2, put it as section 5, and give it a new title.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd like to do is to clean it up in the sense that some of it is very factual, and then there are other things that say, this should be the easiest thing to do. And to me, that maybe doesn't belong there. And that's a value judgment. I mean, it may be completely true, but
well, Well, except that if it's just in the context of an example and rationale.
No, but it's, you know,
Well, I think the only way to really handle it is we have to, you need to.
so here, for
Point it
example,
out.
on, it says for the results report, it says the results report is probably the easiest component to implement. And then under the central ballot scanner, it says this is probably the easiest hardware component to work on and implement first.
So we could also separate the component description from the
Yeah, I mean-
phasing and iterativeness.
Yeah, because
I see.
what we could focus on is to say, what's the functionality of each of these things? Okay, you know, high-level description of what it does, what are the inputs to it, what are the subcomponents, what are the outputs? And then, once we have personas or something, we can say, who's going to use this?
Yeah, so where does it say this is probably the easiest? Where does it say that?
There's this and this.
Yeah, okay, so currently.
One's a hardware component, one's a software
No,
component.
but currently there already is separate subsections for each component.
Right.
And, you know, it has the things that you're talking about, a description of like what it does. the
Right, right.
interfaces. And then the language you're pointing to, it is in a separate rationale
Okay.
section, so,
All right.
so it's
But,
currently.
although it does say complexity, low, medium, whatever, once you get into
So
the.
also your, most of your components here, I think, are just for this sort of first
Yeah, it's just the
stage.
first stage.
You didn't discuss on-demand ballot printing or
Right.
so
Yeah.
forth.
So,
So I had a suggestion to add audit as one of your categories. Same comment as before.
okay,
And sort of another, on the central ballot scanner, I think it might be worth explicitly noting that you have ballot batch management as part of it. Like, I'm not sure how things are stored, like in boxes by precinct or whatever, but it also has to deal with managing these collections of boxes of ballots, or how they're marked, stored, classified, and so forth.
yeah,
As,
that could maybe go in the.
just like some extra elaboration.
That could go in the description, you mean? Or-
Yeah,
Yeah. I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around, so Tony's suggestion, so one of your point is that we're kind of mixing sort of like the factual with the more,
Yeah,
like judgmental
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, and,
So the judgment, so how would you like to organize that?
well, there are some judgmental, I mean, there are some real recommendations. I mean, we can lay out at the beginning, as you've done, these are the pieces that we think, you know, if we break the system down, these are the pieces, right? These are the components. Here's a high-level description of what they do. We also have some recommendations about where to start. And that's there. So it may be just that the continuity could be better, the thread that weaves them together yeah, could be, could make it more clear why we're doing all this. Because otherwise, you know, an implementer is gonna look at this when it comes time to bid, and they're gonna say, well, we wanna do it a different way, or we don't wanna put people off by over-constraining them.
Well, we're not, this is not, people bidding are not gonna, I mean, this is not.
It's
the
gonna be an open
direction.
document, isn't this gonna be a public document?
Yeah, but I mean, this is just,
It's not gonna be an RFP, it's not gonna be part of an RFP and requirements and stuff that they
No.
have to do.
we're just
Right.
providing
So-
Okay, well,
perspective, but,
good. So, you know, it's a very good start. I really
well,
like
also
all
I
of
think
it.
it's good that, to label these things like they are, because then when we discuss it, we can refer to those names like the ballot picture interpreter.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least I'm trying to think of. I mean, I would like for us to make progress today, like in kind of like starting to refactor, maybe, start moving stuff around the way you're suggesting. I'm just trying to think of what.
But it's hard to group edit.
Well, no, but I mean, I think if we could say like move these sections to their own section, and that
Yeah.
I think conceptually it'll make it easier to talk about next time.
So what do you want to do about 4.4, which is very brief?
Okay, well, we're still on 4.2,
Oh, all right,
but,
okay, never mind. Go back.
so I would like to suggest that we, so I think, because the budget season's gonna be coming up in like February, and this is when they're gonna decide how much money, I think it would be helpful if we could have a section like, here is a proposed first phase.
Uh-huh.
And then the budget amount could be like funding the first phase. And then, so I think it makes sense to highlight that. And then if it's kind of highlighted by being in its own section.
So that's what 4.2.1 is, right?
Well, I think that's kind of what 4.2 is.
Oh, okay, the whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Well, so two things. One, you're recommending an incremental approach, and then you're having this as a proposed or sample first set of deliverables also implemented in a phased approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think another, so if this were broken out into its own section of, proposed first phase, I think we could also, in addition, take the sections that are describing the components, and then maybe take those out and move them to like a separate section of like components that need to be built, but without regard to like the order.
Oh, yeah, because some of that is actually going on. Like some of the things that are going on in 4.2 is you're actually documenting components that need to be built regardless.
Yeah, and that way we could just list all the components, and then in a separate section we can say, here's the order we're suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think that would be good.
So this is kind of like around all in the area of like a proposed implementation plan, high level implementation plan. Like what are the things we want to build, what order? Do you think it would make sense to have a section of, proposed components, and then another section of proposed like phases?
I think that would make sense.
Okay.
And I think the section of components, is extendable and growable.
Yeah.
Whatever, it could go
It is
into,
what?
it's extendable and growable,
Yeah.
so, start off at least with what we want in the first phase, but we can, some may
Yeah.
require decisions to be made, like,
Yeah.
to allow all voters to use the same machines at an accessible border would, for example.
Yeah, and we had a thing early on in our scope that we did want to start with the things that we know, like, we want to attack the things that would be developed earlier first.
Yeah.
So I think it's consistent,
So it sounds like we have a plan for this section.
but, would you want to state the plan?
I mean, it sounds like what you just said is you'll make us, well, I say you, we, and this task we will probably end up delegating to you. We will make a separate section with components,
Yeah.
and then another section that describes what we propose our first phase would be, and presumably the language about building things iteratively and how you might use a partial first phase would be in there as well.
Should I
Somewhere.
just bring that to the next meeting then, or?
That would be great.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll do that.
I'm also trying, like, we're approaching the 3-hour mark, so I'm also trying to not
Okay.
get bogged down too much with this one.
Okay. So, just want to clarify, should any of the changes be done before the next meeting, or none of them?
I guess if some of us try to propose changes to the text that you're moving around, it might get slightly awkward.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking that just like in the terms of moving something to its own section. Like
Hmm.
if we just say, change 4.2 to
Oh, I
5,
see.
and just say proposed first phase, and then without changing.
I think if
anything.
it's a really simple move and rename, then maybe, but I'm not sure that's actually what we're talking about necessarily, so maybe you can see how you want to do this, and if it's completely trivial, I guess you can just do it, but if it actually involves changing text around, then maybe you take it to the next meeting.
Okay, I'll just bring it to the next meeting then.
Okay, that's also fine backup, yeah.
Okay, makes it easier.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, and I think that it's gonna need an executive summary.
which,
Oh, the document as a whole. you mean?
Yeah, so, what are the, I mean, we say recommendations, but we go on then for a lot of pages.
Yeah.
And for the people with a short attention span, what, there's the key recommendation, for example, of hiring a project manager. That ties into the budget, is a key recommendation of, componentizing the solution and doing it incrementally. I mean, there's like, 5 or fewer key high-level things that we think are central to the entire, if you want to call it call it out as an executive summary ahead of the recommendations or something.
okay, well, let's maybe, okay, so that's kind of another discussion. What do we want to highlight? Because it's kind of hard to decide, actually.
So when do we need to do that?
There's, I mean,
I guess we could do it.
it's going to be
more
going
than
on
we have
potentially
now.
for years.
It's an incremental document.
Yeah, okay.
I agree with the general notion that there should be such a section. I'm not sure it would be in it either, but we could have a discussion next month about what the things are that we want to highlight in such a thing, and then send someone out to write it.
Yeah, okay.
So, Chris, would you like me to just make comments and write them up for your and the committee's?
Yeah, because if we each
review,
do
as
pull
opposed to
requests,
Going through it all,
For,
I mean, here at the meetings,
um,
I'm just asking sort of procedurally, like, what's the best way to,
For what, for change in general, or for the
or
refactoring
just
of section 4?
suggestions on some things to add?
oh, I think that ideally to bring patches, a week before the meeting, prepare some patches, and then.
but if
send-
we each do a pull request, they're gonna overlap in.
No, well, you send the
Well,
patches.
is this an MD file?
Yep.
Okay.
No, see, these patch files are the source files for.
Okay.
Yeah.
this. Yeah, no, I mean, as long as the patch files are part of the agenda packet, they're not, you don't make a PR on GitHub, you just.
Yeah. I mean, Tony's right that we can still cause conflicts with each other, but as long as we have an okay understanding of what everyone's working on, that
Yeah, that's
shouldn't be too terrible.
Okay, well, I'm
And
gonna
of course,
work
Chris
on
is the
this
mediator
whole.
and all this, so he's gonna notice.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do the user story and the context stuff.
Did
Right.
you want to work on the executive summary as well?
I think that's a month away. I think once we pull this all together and we see,
Okay. So I'm gonna work on breaking the phase thing
Hmm.
for the next meeting.
And then I was going to work on, there's an existing to-do about the UI shim thing that I'm just gonna expand. And you might move that, but that should be rebaseable, like, if not by hand, like, I'm just gonna take a to-do brackets thing and expand it into text.
Okay.
And I'm gonna find a place to put in recommendations about both the reproducible builds and secure boot and signed by the Secretary of State and all that kind of stuff that we talked about.
Okay, great.
And try to put that into
Okay. That was one of my comments,
concise, sensible words and try to, like, distill that.
Okay. Okay, so what else? Did we already we voted on the patches, right? Okay.
I
Yeah.
believe so, yeah.
Then what were you gonna say, Carl?
Well, I had a comment on 4.6, I guess, like just listing some of the software requirements. So, kind of one thing that I think would be good to recommend is to, at least in terms of design, is to separate out sensitive code from unsensitive code. So like a voting machine or ballot counting might be sensitive code, but the data converters that you use to build files that drive those things, are unsensitive. So like pvote is a good example. Open source, I think it's like 400 and some lines of Python for the whole voting system. So it works by doing as much as possible ahead of time so that the machine itself, the code is small.
I like that. Do you want to write that up for next meeting?
Sure, I can propose a couple
Do you-
of bullet items or
Do
whatever.
you think that would make sense under security or software architecture design? or-
Well, the other item, is kind of related to reuse of existing open software is encouraged. Some people take that, I went to a talk, they said the goal of software development is to reuse as much code as possible. And I think one of the goals should be to minimize the total amount of software and also when you're using open source software, minimize the size of the chain of dependencies.
Mhm.
So it's like, instead of using a whole open source library, it might be just better to copy it and paste it if it makes it substantially less. So the question is, a lot of times we can't audit. If we use a lot of software, we can't audit it.
Yeah,
It's not practical, whereas you can do line by line audits
yeah,
on a smaller package. And then if you separate out the sensitive code from the insensitive code, then you only really have to audit the sensitive
yeah.
code.
I mean, this does seem, it's a little bit orthogonal to the open source though. It seems like a security issue or architecture thing.
Well, it's not relevant to open source, you're right. It's more just software.
Yeah, write as little code as
Maybe it's-
possible.
Maybe it's like 4.8 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but
Actually,
yeah,
4.8 begins with favor designs that promote reusing components,
Yeah.
which I guess is a different thing, but it's also about reuse.
I mean,
So
obviously,
probably my comments they're not related to open source.
Yeah.
So it really should be 4.8.
Why don't you write that up for the next meeting?
All right.
I mean, you want to encourage people to use tested, validated, whatever word you like, code as opposed, wherever possible, as
Well-
opposed to writing new code. Right? You want to
Well,
write as little new
depends.
code as possible. It's less testing if you're just plugging in something that you already trust.
But people end up
I
running
know.
more glue code than it would be to write the original code.
Yep,
Sometimes.
sometimes, yep.
Okay,
But you don't want to encourage, you want to discourage them from reinventing the wheel.
Correct.
The world does not need another, database management system.
Anyway.
Or voice synthesis system.
Exactly.
Are we done with this item?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, let's move on. We've still got Carl's,
Yeah.
Oh, can I make one more comment?
Sure.
Like for your purposes, I had a comment under security is that like all the intermediate files should be in a format that for easy inspection and audit and it should be compatible with revision control.
What do you mean by intermediate files? Intermediate
Well,
files
I'm
of what?
just saying that all the collections of data files that we use, it could configuration files, it could be input files, it could be output files, but they should be, instead of, you could just store everything in one giant SQL database, but then you can't really track it, you can't
Right.
audit it, you can't see it, you can't do revision control
Yeah.
on it.
Revision control configuration is something I'm a big fan of.
So basically, the input, output, and intermediate data files,
Mhm.
I think it's good to assign some requirements on those, that they be, so it's possible to inspect and audit them, and
Mhm.
also to be able to track changes.
Yeah, no, for configuration, definitely, and I include things like that definition in that. That's something, those are things where versioning is good. I'm not sure I completely get the complete gist of what you're saying, but is this something you want me to write about, or do you want to write
Oh,
about?
well, you were writing the section on security issues in general, what you were saying about
Oh,
build
security.
environment
Yeah.
and, security.
Sure,
It's
I'll-
sort of just a related issue.
would that go under deployment maybe, or?
I don't know, my comment was under security.
So you're saying configuration files should be protecting the source? I mean, is that?
Well, all the inputs and outputs should be, it should be possible to inspect and audit them.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so
I'll put
anything-
it on my to-do list. I don't know what I'll come up with.
Well, just think about it,
Yeah.
and then I can make other
If you,
suggestions.
if you don't like it, you can make more suggestions.
Okay, anything else? Before we move on. Okay, and we did take public comments already, I think, on this item.
You wanna-
No. Well,
Okay,
it's
so let's move on to the next item.
Item 10, voting process and equipment decisions. Decision and possible action regarding voting process and equipment decisions that need to be made to implement open source voting in San Francisco.
Okay, so I'm gonna just turn this over to Carl. This is something that you had.
Right, so,
wanted.
some of this is kind of covered in Chris's document, but I thought it would be good to have.
Let's say it's the
Oh,
committee's.
sorry,
document.
whatever,
The
section,
committee's
9. So, so I thought it would be worth just having a standalone section that lists like different decisions and alternatives that need to be made,
Okay.
and maybe giving some pros and cons with some background. And so I put this together just kind of as a suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, at this point, it's not meant to be anything to be approved, but maybe you could just give some feedback on what you think about making this kind of thing and how it should be organized, or I'm willing to do some more work on it if I have some guidance.
I think some of this is in the document, the recommendations document already, but not nearly to this level of detail.
So yeah, the idea was just to put it in its own
Okay, yeah.
list. Here's all the decisions that
Right.
have to be made.
There is kind of a section like that, I think, in the recommendations document, but it's certainly not, in terms of the things that you're describing here, it's certainly not as fleshed out.
Yeah, I know we've mentioned a bunch of
Yeah.
these things before.
No, but I mean, there is actual language in the document already about, in this
So,
section, it just doesn't contain as much detail as
Yeah.
you've written.
The section you're referring to, it's under requirements gathering, it's the
Ah.
key decisions.
Right.
So I think we would want to maybe pull that out into its own section and combine with what you're writing.
Yeah, that was basically what my suggestion
So, Carl, one of the things I noticed right away was that when you have voting types to be considered, those in fact map into these key personas.
is. Like I had some of that in.
At the
right,
bottom of the first page,
assumptions,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yes. But actually what you meant might have been even a little bit more.
But
detailed.
it ties together. I can work from there.
Is this next?
So I mean, this whole
I
assumption.
mean, I'm getting lightheaded, man, I haven't eaten in a long time. I
Yeah,
haven't eaten dinner
I
before,
brought,
so-
we should
Sorry.
send out for pizza, that's what GitHub, yes, you know what I mean.
I actually ate at their office yesterday.
Not-
Good night.
I've been over there too, but
So, I mean, the assumptions might not
Grubhub
be
is
part
what
of
I
this,
meant.
but I thought it was useful to put those assumptions there. Just things that went.
So, this document, was that emailed to, where does this document exist once I turn this folder back over to
It's on
Don?
the agenda packet
There's a PDF file.
Okay, good,
for today's meeting.
all right, got it, good.
Well, my suggestion would be, I think, I think we should have a section like this. I think
Mhm.
it's good.
And this isn't necessarily a complete list of all the issues, but
course,
it's
yeah.
just a first cut.
The only like big question I have is, where do we draw the line between questions that we should answer versus questions that we should say that, like, the department needs to answer?
Yeah,
Like,
and-
where do we
and
fall on that?
I don't have a,
Yeah.
I don't have an answer to that, other than I think maybe some of these, might be sort of obvious that we can make a recommendation on. Others are, it's just, at some point, that decision needs to be made.
So Carl, do you think maybe for the next meeting, like, you could take this 4.3.1 section, and then just kind of like merge it with what you have.
Yeah.
And just format it in
Yeah.
a similar way.
So is this 4 point, is this what's been there all along?
Yeah,
And
just-
print- I mean, this isn't like all new, this is.
No, this has been there all
is-
along. Yeah, the
okay.
entire copy of section 4 and the
Okay.
thing has been there all along.
So, but just try to like, yeah, just organized in a way that,
Okay, so could you comment on just my layout style, like does it make sense to?
the question format.
Yeah, kind of like that, or where the issues are phrased in the question, with maybe some background and alternative pros and cons.
Yeah, I think it's fine, yeah.
No, I think it's good.
Or if you have a suggestion on anything better.
No, I think it's fine. I think maybe what you could do is if you merge it with the existing section, the existing section's not phrased as questions, so maybe you could convert that into
Oh
the
yeah, I'll
format
just do
you're
it all the
using.
same,
Yeah.
but make sure it includes all of these that we already have.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And you can just do it as it doesn't need to be as an MD file, it could just be as what you have here.
Oh, this is an MD file.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay, well then, good. You can leave it as an MD file. Anyone else?
I just turned it into a PDF for us to read, but I could have printed the MD file directly.
It's more readable this way. No, I think the fact you're thinking about like, you know, what kind of printing devices do we have? Do they require AC power? Do they cause jams? Do they require replacing ink
Right,
halfway
just I think
through?
when
Do
we
they
get
dry
together,
out?
we can brainstorm and figure out all
Yeah.
these issues.
Yeah, maybe over time we can answer some of them too.
Yeah. Or we can at least make a recommendation and not say that we're not, I mean, we can just say it as, well, this probably might be the best solution.
Yeah.
And also it might affect, some of these issues might affect our kind of phased implementation proposal.
Yeah. Were there any questions that you thought you're least sure about?
No, I mainly at this point just wanted some feedback on kind of the overall approach and style. And,
Yeah, I would, for number 11, I would look up the term that's used in the legislation about remote accessible voting. So that would be
which legislation?
the remote accessible voting, there's a bill that was passed this year.
Okay, yeah, so,
Maybe a couple years ago.
yeah, so I definitely will change the wording from alternative format to the remote accessible.
Or whatever the legislation is.
Yeah,
I can
whatever
forward that
it's
to you. I
called.
can forward the
Yeah.
bill to you. Okay.
There may be some other issues. I also started reading the California Election Code in detail to find like all those issues we were talking about and wrote some notes on it. But I'll go back to that. But some of those, in terms of what's allowed on a ballot or not on a ballot, although it seems like there's a lot of laws that say you should do this, but then people don't do that, so.
I mean, one of the things about election laws is, you saw this in Alabama this week, is that even when the laws say things, then there is not that much of a penalty for not doing it. Like,
Well,
counties
also-
get away with not following the law.
Yeah,
all the time.
also you have the government code that contains the election regulations, and then you also have the Secretary of State promulgates
Yeah. Yeah,
rules as well.
yeah, and they don't always promulgate rules. They don't necessarily promulgate rules that are in accordance with the law, or they skip things and.
But then the law says, oh, you should put like, I voted in this column here, but then it says, well, you don't actually have to follow these in detail, so.
Right. Yeah, so that kind of stuff can be suggestive rather than mandatory, and there's also,
But in terms of like what the marks are on it, we won't have to worry about privacy and issues, and
yeah.
then also whatever the state law says.
Yeah, and also thank you for doing this work. It's great, yeah.
So I think by the next meeting, I'll try to put something together that's a little bit more complete and includes, kind of reworking, what we have and repackaging it, and then,
It could be its own top level section.
what's that?
It could be its own top level section within our document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, we can discuss if there's more questions to be answered, or if we wanna talk about, if maybe I didn't think of some pros and cons or whatever, but,
Is the QR code question in there?
no, not exactly, but I'll put it there,
Yeah.
explicitly.
And then also, the other question, Chad, do you have, was there a question about whether, to what extent there should be different types of ballots that look visually different versus?
That's in here.
That's in here, okay. Okay, let's open it up to public comment on this item. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I have a question, or maybe just note to look into about, AB 450 or SB 450, whatever it is, the voter's choice. Does the county have the option of going straight to vote by mail eventually, or does it have to go through the voting center model first?
I actually don't know. I think we're not allowed to go to all vote by mail. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that's, not sure.
Because I think that LA is sort of its own, has its own rules, but some of the other counties.
Yeah, they have special treatment in the law.
Well, but they're following this, they're following the state law though.
Yeah, they're
Right,
following
but
the same
LA
process, but
County-
it's accelerated.
LA County
Oh.
has its own section. So they're moving to the voting centers, but, I mean, they're really, pretty much, when we have this VSAP or whatever, voting center for one round or two at the most, they're going straight to vote.
My understanding of the law was that LA was going to roll it out earlier or more quickly in the other counties, but
Yeah.
I don't know the details either.
But no one's going to all vote by mail, right?
Right, not even in LA.
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
It has the option of, or it can do all vote by mail after it's done a round of.
Oh, I didn't know
It
that.
has, LA has its own section. Actually, when they do their voting center, they're not doing all vote by mail. They're only sending ballots to permanent mail voters. Permanent vote by mail voters, which I thought was weird.
Oh, I see, you're asking whether every voter is gonna receive a vote by mail ballot, is that what you're
There-
asking?
Only the ones that are registered as permanent vote by mail voters, or at least that's how I read their section. And I guess if you request a vote by mail. But it's not automatically all vote by mail when they do their first round of voting centers, so I didn't know,
So you said there was some bill in the legislature?
it already happened.
Oh,
And some counties are going.
but you don't remember the
It's
number?
SB 450 or AB 450.
It's the Voter Choice
Voters
Act.
Choice Act.
It's the one that creates vote centers.
All right, thank you. Okay, is there any other discussion before we move on to next item? Okay.
Item 11, topics for future discussion. Discussion and possible action regarding topics for future discussions.
Okay, anyone have anything to say on this?
I think we
Pretty
said
well
a bunch of
talked
stuff
out.
already.
Yeah.
Okay. Public comment? Seeing none? Okay. So the time is now 9:25 p.m. The meeting is adjourned.